Chapter 1077. This is the document for the equipment entrusted to you by the Horned Demon for the auction. Luo Nen spent a few words to state the facts he saw. Then he asked, "What about you guys? What do you plan on doing now?" "Obviously, we're here to beg for mercy." Blood Demon rushed to answer on behalf of the other side. But then he began to speak in a strange tone. "This signal has finally been transmitted from the central nervous system to the nerve endings. The problem is, if your fingers are burned, why are you showing your face?" At this time, the woman in formal attire finally got the chance to speak. She still maintained her bent posture, but she was able to express herself quickly and clearly. "Lord Luo Nan, please believe in our sincerity. We will let this group of auction items with serious flaws enter the withdrawal process." As she spoke, her back suddenly sank slightly. It was Luo Nan placing the folder and the corsage on her smooth back. Then he turned around and left. This woman in formal attire was proficient in business etiquette. Even though she had placed herself in a lowly position, she was still able to maintain her graceful bearing. But Luo Nan's move could not be resolved by any etiquette. Her entire body froze in place. The others waited for Luo Nan and the other two to enter the elevator before they dared to move. They helped take the folder off her back. "Executive Manager Kawahara, are you okay?" The mess in the elevator was not worth mentioning. In the elevator car, Blood Demon praised Luo Nan's actions. "Beautifully done. Don't look at how they were just short of sitting down." In fact, this was the most insincere expression. Kenta Toyama wasn't so old that he couldn't move. He just randomly sent a person over to talk about a solution. In the end, he just wanted to play a trick here. The only thing that needed to be thought about was the quality of the person chosen. That person should be your type, right? Push her out. Maybe your heart will soften and you'll agree? Luo Nan's expression did not change. Zhang Yingying rolled her eyes. She was still a bit curious. "What are you thinking by doing this? And the auction item. You need a plan to deal with it, right?" "I didn't think too much about it. I just felt that any enterprise in Osaka City would certainly have a connection with the Amaterasu Order. They don't dare to offend me. But do they dare to offend the Church of True God?" Luo Nen clearly didn't want to chat on this topic. He turned to ask Blood Demon, "Who are you lobbying for?" An old man with even less sincerity than Kenta Toyama. "The only thing better than him is probably on this ship." Blood Demon grinned. "Maybe he's paying attention to you right now. What's his reaction?" "Who?" Zhang Yingying blinked. "It's the one you scolded during the appraisal meeting." Zhang Yingying's eyelids twitched, and she immediately stopped talking. Without his boss by his side, it was better to keep a low profile. Luo Nan's thoughts turned for a bit, and he confirmed his target, Abner. "Aha, are you a little surprised?" "He's all right." Luo Nan spoke the truth. "He didn't seem to have a particularly tough feeling when I saw him come over today. I didn't pay much attention, so I don't know if that's what you mean." The Blood Demon burst into laughter. "That's exactly what I meant. Over the years, his beard became more and more yellow, and his intestines became more and more twisted." To the side, Zhang Yingying couldn't help but ask. "Then the matter of him asking you to be a lobbyist, and the matter of him going through the boss, should be the same thing. If it's related to Gong Qi's death and the issue of claiming responsibility, then that should be the case. I don't think they have any other tricks up their sleeves." "Death." Luo Nen didn't understand for a moment. "They're both violent deaths. A passionate armed melee and a deliberate murder aren't the same thing, right?" The Blood Demon winked at Luo Nan. "In any case, the dead can't live. In the end, what's going on, whether the responsibility is big or small, will be determined by the living." Of course, the other side also said that claiming responsibility is the basic premise. Luo Nen thought for a bit. But he didn't understand. He didn't understand. What was the point of beating around the bush? This design depends on the level of subsequent operations. To put it bluntly, Yellowbeard is stalling for time. He wants to drag the conflict to the back. He even wants to do a big shift. He already doesn't have the confidence to settle things at the Round Table Conference. So before he thinks about victory, he thinks about defeat. He's afraid of scraping that old face of his. The Blood Demon had clearly said that Abner might have pricked up his ears to listen in, but no one was as excessive as him. Right now, At least half of Abner lives by relying on his face. He was much more dazzling than he is now when he ascended to the position in the early days. He truly relied on his fists to beat people to death. The problem is that he's gotten used to being a consul these past few years. In the circle, he can rely on his old face to succeed in every endeavor. He's accomplished in the art of face, so he's ashamed to use his fists. Luo Nan went, "Oh." It seemed that he understood, but he didn't say anything else. Just like this, they exited the elevator and walked a few dozen steps through a tunnel with extremely high privileges and restrictions. "Hey, do you agree or not? Or are you saying that you want to discuss this with the martial monarch? This isn't urgent, right? Hee, of course we're not in a hurry. But it's hard to say for Abner. Fine. Let's leave him hanging first. The blood demon really didn't have the professional ethics of a lobbyist." He chuckled and tossed this matter to the side. At this time, Luo Nan took the initiative to talk to him. "Is the topic of the secret contract the one you guys want to backdoor with? How about it? Are you interested? I know this topic is your type. I'm a bit interested. Do you have detailed information? It's on the agenda." Of course there's information. The blood demon knew of Luo Nan's special state, so there was no need to share the documents. He snapped his fingers and shared his virtual interface, letting Luo Nan conduct a round of overview. "Actually, I should have given it to you earlier. What if I agreed to cooperate with you guys? It's not too late now. Not only do we need staunch allies on this issue, we also need universal understanding and sympathy." Bad choice of words. Luo Nan spoke to the blood demon on and off. At the same time, he quickly skimmed through the relevant contents of the topic material and clarified the relevant topic. Discussing the X factor. I remember you guys saying earlier that this sort of basic level stuff isn't very popular these past few years. But it can still attract people's attention. It's a very good entry point. At least that's how I understand it. That's truly a pity. I'm saying that it's too much of a pity not to delve into the discussion. Luo Nan's attitude was quite sincere. On the topic material provided by the secret contract High Lord, Luo Nan raised an old but classic proposition. X, the unknown core element that allowed supernatural powers to appear on Earth, the core element that allowed humans to carry out highly efficient self-evolution. In the end, what is it? And how should we go about discovering it? Is it a simple invasion of mutated genes? Is there an additional special composition in the Earth's atmosphere? Or is there a change in the operating rules of a more fundamental existence of space-time? Over the past few decades, this sort of research in the inner world had risen and fallen, never ceasing. Practically all possibilities in the current cognitive domain had been exhausted. Right now, the secret contract High Lord did not provide a completely new research perspective from the perspective of the material. However, he made an unprecedented in-depth exploration from one of the perspectives. The observation abyssal region. Chapter 1078. The division of the mental plane of the inner world was still in the age of chaos. Even the concept of 3 layers, 1 area, and 1 domain did not exist. The exploration, observation, and research of the abyss sector had already begun. Although the theory could not keep up, it was useful. As long as one could actually touch that side, resist the violent turbulence, and form an effective interference structure, one would be able to use an unimaginable power. One could use it to attack and cultivate, pulling one's level away from others in an instant. In comparison, the polar domain, which seemed to be higher level and more transcendent, was a notch lower in practicality. Therefore, for a long time, including now, the inner world's development of applied techniques aimed at the abyss sector far surpassed the relevant basic research. In the past few decades, it was not that no one suspected that the existence of the abyss sector and even the polar domain was the X factor that turned supernatural power from legend into reality. However, no one was able to find the corresponding evidence. Even now, no one was able to figure it out. Did they always exist? Or did they suddenly appear at some point in time and change the course of the world? Luo Nan quickly flipped through Lord Secretdeed's discussion materials. He did not find any words or sentences that could determine the nature of the abyss sector. Clearly, this research had not touched upon the essence of the abyss sector. As for whether or not there was a breakthrough, it was up to the individual to decide. What could be confirmed was that Lord Secretdeed's observation work was quite solid. The observation points were spread all over the world. The basic data was detailed down to the day, and the corresponding special events were accurate down to the minute and second. A single glance was enough to tell that this was a research team of considerable scale and an astronomical amount of investment. This material attempted to speak through data, but due to the unfathomable nature of the abyss sector for the vast majority of people, too many abstract mathematical models were used. They were extremely profound. This was not Luo Nan's domain of expertise. It was quite difficult to restore it to the configuration thinking he was more accustomed to. But Luo Nan's interest did not diminish. I want to take a closer look. Luo Nan decided to search and compare this report with the external neurons database. Perhaps it would give him a whole new perspective. In fact, there were already a few concepts in the material. They were more sensitive to him, and they were quite enlightening. Reality might also bring trouble. Luo Nan shot a glance at Blood Demon. No wonder they took the initiative to seek a collaboration. In order to give you a heads up? Blood Demon grinned. Luo Nan didn't delve too deeply into this matter. She had researched these sensitive issues in passing over a long period of observation. She had taken a very righteous stance in the beginning. Even if he knew that they must have some ulterior motive for choosing such a critical juncture, he couldn't say anything. In fact, judging from the Blood Demon's attitude, if he asked a few more questions, he might be able to dig something out. But since he had already rejected the suggestion of a deeper cooperation, there was no point in asking further. In any case, he himself was a point that could not be avoided. Since he was already in the whirlpool, why would he be afraid of getting wet? Needless to say, Luo Nan still needed these things for the pressing matter at hand. At this time, the three of them had already returned to the exhibition hall in Area C and entered the venue for the night. Strictly speaking, ever since the Jade Light left Ban City, a trade fair with the theme of distortion had already begun. In this place, the prey and collections of individuals, the raw materials and technologies for production, and even the intangible but extremely important market and connections were all being communicated and traded inside and outside the hall. Now, the climax of the artificially designed event had arrived. When he re-entered the venue, most of the booths had been removed, but the exhibition did not stop. Instead, it changed from a general display to a demonstration of fine products and a small-scale auction to warm up the audience. The entire Area C became clamorous, but under the professional guidance of the conference staff, it appeared hot but not impatient. It was noisy but not chaotic. Yes, this had a lot to do with the quality of the people present. Luo Nan confirmed that there were many professionals in the field of distortion aside from the buyers who held large sums of money in their hands. They were either demonstrators, appraisers, or strategists. They clashed and cooperated with each other, clashing with sparks of thought and wisdom. This was very much in line with the design of a technology and equipment trade fair and demonstration. He walked and stopped along the way, occasionally concentrating on some of the project demonstrations and materials. He was completely unworried about the auction that had already begun. Gradually, Luo Nan gained a basic understanding of the most advanced distortion technology of the day. He could confirm that this trade fair was indeed selling goods. This kind of atmosphere design is quite good. She's pretty good. Luo Nan made a casual evaluation. Wang Yu is very good at utilizing the strong points of professionals. Bai Xinyan had probably been waiting here for a long time. She magically popped out from the crowd and inserted herself between Luo Nan and Zhang Yingying. She held onto the crook of their arms in an intimate manner. She looked even more unbridled than she had been in the afternoon. Clearly, this was due to Zhang Yingying's presence. Zhang Yingying, who had instantly become a shield, could not help but roll her eyes. If you continue to court death, no one will be able to protect you. Apologies. The demonstration project died prematurely, and I was sold out by my boyfriend. I was carefree, so I drank a few more cups at the party. I was a bit excited. Don't mind me. Bai Xinyan actually blew on Luo Nan's face as she spoke. Sure enough, there was a bit of the smell of alcohol, and it carried an indescribable fragrance. It wasn't unpleasant. Right now, she was no longer wearing the white coat of a researcher. Instead, she wore a plain white evening gown. She lightly brushed off her makeup, and because she was slightly drunk, she had an unbridled and innocent appearance. She looked like a white lotus flower. Luo Nan's expression didn't change. His gaze turned to Zhang Yingying. Zhang Yingying clasped her hands together with difficulty and made a pleased gesture. Her face was full of distress. Let's do this for now. Whether it was now, the auction, or the follow-up round table conference, having a tool by one side would always give them a bit more leeway for change. Luo Nan was disinclined to say anything more, but Blood Demon suddenly became interested. Hey, little white flower. You said that your demonstration project is finished. Doesn't that mean you're missing a finale? The auction house is quite embarrassed, right? Little White Flower, by Xinyan didn't mind this temporary nickname at all. She extended her neck and stuck her cheek out from the side of Luo Nan's head. She chuckled as she continued Blood Demon's words. Exactly. Right now the auction house is a mess. It's too miserable. Blood Demon had an expression of bemoaning the state of the universe and pitying the fate of mankind. He turned to look at Luo Nan. If it's said that the one who started the trouble needs to untie it, shouldn't we take some responsibility for the other side and support them? Ha! That's what I'm thinking. Let's give him a show. Of course, I'll speak the truth first. It's also to create a gimmick for the revised card deck that I'm about to publish. First, hand in 1 or 2 pieces of homework. Give me an Extraordinary's portrait card. We'll directly put it up for auction. Chapter 1079. Luo Nan felt baffled by Blood Demon's sudden idea. Most of the people at the auction are rich and powerful. They have nothing to do with the inner world. Who would care about this? Blood Demon saw that Luo Nan didn't immediately refuse. Instead, Blood Demon considered the problem of the audience for him. He immediately knew that there was a way. He grinned and wagged his finger. No. Quite a few of them are from the same circle. They're all in the ruling circle. It's just that they use money and power, while we use our fists. Blood Demon extended his 5 fingers. He clenched and released them. Plus, as long as you're certain that the card you make has the same effect as before. TSK. Don't play dumb. I'm talking about the move that summons Ox Demon. You're counting on those people to activate and borrow the extraordinary power of the card. Why? Do you rely on burning money? The Blood Demon blinked. You mean to say that it was indeed effective? Can it be used once, or can it be used multiple times? How would I know? It's just that the painting material given by High Lord Secret Deed is good. Stop flattering each other. It's not like I didn't ask about it. Blood Demon clapped his hands. It doesn't matter if it can be used once or multiple times. It doesn't matter if it's practical or not for those people. It's a gimmick. With this move, this old man who doesn't even have the strength to truss a chicken is the same as inviting a door god home. A living door god. How interesting. Generally speaking, door gods have all died before. Blood Demon acted as if he didn't hear these words. He began to plan the details in high spirits. With how chaotic the auction is right now, it doesn't take much to get through the joints and add an impromptu program. As for the candidates, it's a bit troublesome. Brother, your knowledge isn't enough. Since it was a portrait, they could only choose the ones Luo Nan had seen before. There were nearly 100 extraordinaries in the entire world. There were only a dozen or so of these. There were also some that they couldn't court death no matter what. For example, Her Majesty Empress Wu, who was waiting for them in the private room of the auction site. Of course, since Blood Demon took the initiative to bring it up, he certainly had a plan in mind. I have a good candidate on my side. He has strength, prestige, and style. He doesn't have too high of a relationship with everyone. Generally speaking, the awkward situation of a door god won't occur. Plus, he's someone you've seen before. The vast majority of people have never seen before. Hearing Blood Demon lay out a long list, Zhang Yingying couldn't help but be curious. Are there such people among the extraordinaries? Who is it? The Snow Demon circled the air with her arms to show that it was huge. Then she said, Poseidon. Poseidon? Luo Nan didn't react for a moment. Diamond? Zhang Yingying was confused. Who's with that guy? She suddenly went silent in the latter half of the conversation. Blood Demon used a finger to tap her, praising her for having a lively brain. He turned to face Luo Nan with an expression of exasperation that Luo Nan didn't live up to his expectations. Didn't you just fight it yesterday? No matter what, they should know each other very well, right? No one had seen that fellow before, But whether it was in the inner world or the secular world, his name was extremely resounding. Once he appeared in the world, there was no doubt that he would explode. It's still the image first. Before he finished speaking, Shui Yao suddenly froze, and his footsteps slowed down. Luo Nan and the others overtook them. Luo Nan curled his lips. Zhang Yingying and Bai Xinyan didn't feel anything at this moment. In fact, the vast majority of the people present were completely unaware that an enormous tsunami had suddenly rolled over them on a special plane that was very close to them. Since the source of the power was too high, the distance between it and the material plane was pulled apart. But in the end, there was still contact, and the point of contact was Shui Yao. Caught off guard, Shui Yao's tyrannical fleshly body, an extraordinary, was frozen on the spot. It wasn't that he couldn't move, but the moment he moved, the balance would be broken. This place would immediately become the center of a direct collision between the two extraordinary powers. The aftermath of the collision was enough to turn the trading center into a slaughterhouse. Luo Nan hadn't seen this sort of control of power that was on the verge of breaking, where a single strand of force fell to the ground. But it really did come from the coward. To be more precise, it came from the threat of Poseidon. It hated Shui Yao to the core. Perhaps this was the difference between a long distance and a short distance? Luo Nan was also affected by the aftermath. It was probably a warning. After all, he was the one who was most likely to expose his true identity. Luo Nan didn't mind. He wasn't afraid yesterday, so what was there to be afraid now? It was just that there was no need. He turned to look at Shui Yao and spoke in a leisurely manner. So you don't know that that person has always attached great importance to his image? Shui Yao grimaced in pain. Luo Nan wasn't particularly surprised by the fact that the coward was Poseidon. He wasn't a complete idiot. He had encountered such a powerful mutant in the South Pacific Ocean, and he had more or less seen some details about it. As long as he did a bit of homework, he would be able to lock his suspicions onto a relatively small range. He already had a high degree of suspicion that the coward was Poseidon. Now that he had confirmed it, it didn't matter. Well, it seemed like it could be a bit useful. Luo Nan's train of thought suddenly expanded. Speaking of which, ever since he began perfecting the magneto-optical mica production line, he had always felt that Ox Ghost's petri dish was too small. Its efficiency was a bit low. The system of the blood flame order could be used, but it wasn't compatible. Luo Nan himself had his so-called believers. His closed system appeared to be quite large. However, there were only 2 or 3 genuine believers. The others were just carriers of thoughts that had been invaded by the altar's spiderweb or distorted by Luo Nan Qi. They were all in a muddle-headed state. They didn't possess true faith. As for this person, Meng Chong had said that Poseidon's extraordinary power had given birth to a few belief systems in many ocean cities. Even though they were scattered and unsystematic, when put together, their scale was much larger than Ox Ghost's potted small order. And the direction of this type of belief was often highly related to the ocean, clouds, storms, lightning, and other imagery. If only he could borrow it. Cough. This idea was quite far off. There were quite a few technical problems. Even if he could use it, it wouldn't be tonight. It would be in the future. However, Luo Nan had another idea that was highly related to Poseidon. He continued to chat with Shui Yao. I heard Blacklion say that in this world, only Poseidon can enter the deep blue world without using any man-made tools? Shui Yao had been given a solid warning, but he couldn't do anything to Poseidon. He felt sullen and followed Luo Nan with a gloomy face. Shui Yao responded in a bad mood. You want him to take you there? How? Swallow you into his stomach and spit you out when we get there? The difficulty might be a bit high. Luo Nan believed that the highly sensitive Poseidon was able to perceive the conversation that involved Poseidon. However, Poseidon maintained his silence. Was it disdain, or was it afraid of something? Perhaps they could talk about this later. The twists and turns caused by the hole in Shui Yao's brain didn't cause any substantial effects in the end. Aside from Luo Nan, the group of people knew the layout of the venue like the back of their hands. They arrived at the auction venue without a hitch. Luo Nan didn't know how the damage to the original booth would affect the layout of the auction venue. He didn't care about this. He would just go wherever Her Majesty Empress Wu led him. The one who opened the door was Meng Chong. This was the chief warrior of the Blood Flame Order. He had originally followed Luo Nan out to sea, but now he had become Her Majesty Empress Wu's bodyguard. Meng Chong let out a sigh of relief when he saw Luo Nan. He bowed in greeting. Mr. Luo, Her Majesty Empress Wu has arrived. At this time, the sound of a hammer falling could be clearly seen from the large screen at the front of the room. It's already begun? Think about how many demonstrations you've seen on the way here. Zhang Yingying was the first to walk past him and enter the room. She shouted at Her Majesty Empress Wu, who was sitting on the sofa. Boss, you finally brought them over. Her Majesty Empress Wu grunted in response to Zhang Yingying's coquettish behavior. Her long black hair was tied up casually, resting on her chest. Her body leaned against the armrest of the sofa, and she slowly flipped through the pages of a book. She didn't even raise her head. She lacked interest in the auction that had already begun. As for the drunk by Xin Yan, she called out, "Boss," from a distance. Then she walked on her tiptoes and sat on the other end of the sofa. She propped her arms up, raised her head, and breathed heavily. Her Majesty Empress Wu didn't care. As for Luo Nan and Shui Yao, she simply pretended that they didn't exist. It seemed that nothing was more interesting than the Buddhist scripture in her hands. Luo Nan's gaze quickly swept over the three women in the room. He had questions in his mind, but there was no need to get answers on the spot. In the end, he still focused on the large screen at the front of the room. Well, he wasn't just relying on his eyes to see. The auction had already begun, but there were problems with the venue, the auction items, the finale program, and even the mastermind behind the scenes. It would be strange if this event could be held well. Luo Nan was at least 20 minutes late, but the atmosphere in the venue was still chaotic. Whether it was in the Great Hall or in the rooms scattered everywhere, practically no one was able to smoothly enter a state of mind. Many people were the sources of gossip, and at the same time, they were broadcasting towers. All sorts of information and emotions flowed within the venue and brewed on the spot. Blood Demon stood shoulder to shoulder with Luo Nan. He adjusted his state of mind from the small twists and turns just now, and he revealed a smile once more. What do you think? You single-handedly created this scene. Don't you feel a sense of accomplishment? I'm not familiar with them, and I'm basically unrelated to them. I don't feel a fucking sense of accomplishment. But you need to know that the people here, as well as the people who are paying attention to this place through remote signals, can mobilize wealth and power. They can practically decide the life and death of a third of the people on Earth. Remote? Does the auction allow telephone bidding? Blood Demon couldn't get Luo Nan's focus. He was stunned for a moment before responding, "It's hard to say for collectibles. After all, they're similar to works of art. The tempo is always fast. But there are some assets and technical auction items that are more suitable." That's quite ideal. Have you thought about which one to choose? Ha! Luo Nan blinked his eyes, his face pure. Didn't you say you wanted to add a program, stir up some gimmicks, and do some operations for the Card Group magazine? You want me to provide cards? I just had a good idea. Blood Demon showed a rare hesitation. This doesn't feel right. Luo Nan didn't care about Blood Demon's thoughts. He continued speaking. Remember that you want to release a commemorative copy? Since you want a door god, some options are very appropriate. Which one do you choose? Or do you want both? Chapter 1080. Kawahara Machiko walked through the trading floor expressionlessly. Her wristwatch vibrated on her slender wrist, and she pressed the stop button. This action had been repeated many times. Manager Kawahara. The subordinate behind her couldn't help but remind her because the call was directed to him. It's a call from the vice president. He wants you to pick up the phone. Hang up. Ha! Hang up, Kawahara Machiko repeated. This was tantamount to giving a footnote to her own choice. She had been sent to the jadeite light from a faraway place to be used as a sacrificial pawn. The higher-ups of the auction house and the shareholders of a higher level did not think that they could rely on words and so-called sincerity to make the youngest extraordinary, who was showing off her sharpness by the day, turn a mess into a friend. What's more, sincerity was nothing more than sincerity. No one was willing to raise the price and throw themselves into the abyss of hatred that they were destined to receive no return. It was even more impossible for this to affect the Amaterasu Order's impression of their god. This was just a routine procedure. Kawahara Machiko had been sent here merely because she possessed more reasons to be dug out. 1. She was a rare female among the higher-ups. 2. She was quite beautiful, and she might conform to Luo Nan's legendary aesthetic standards. 3. She once had some so-called friendship with the woman Luo Nan met in Osaka City, Kitayama Yuahui. Actually, they had only met a few times in business settings. These so-called reasons had all turned into dogs hit after Kawahara Machiko and Kitayama Yuahui failed to contact each other. Instead of thinking about these *T reasons and considering the consequences that couldn't possibly be worse, she might as well take another gamble. She had to think about the consequences that couldn't possibly be worse. Up ahead, Luo Nan's room was already in sight. "Manager, the auction has already begun." The subordinate reminded with all his might, hoping that his superior would understand that meeting with a major client at this time was hard to escape suspicion. Kawahara Machiko stopped walking. She turned to look at her subordinates, who were equally unlucky. "Auction? Everyone, we have staked our careers to come here. What does this have to do with the auction? If we don't have this awareness, when we return..." "No, when we return, there will be no return to speak of." Just as her subordinates' faces turned red or pale, Kawahara Machiko once again felt the vibration of her wrist, but this time, the source of the information given by the personal intelligence was completely different. She shuddered and answered the call instantly. A frivolous male voice came from the other side. "Beauty manager, it seems that your efforts have paid off. Before our Mr. Luo changes his tenderness towards the fairer sex, aren't you going to come over and deepen it?" Kawahara Machiko clenched her fists tightly, but she replied in a soft and clear tone. "Hey, sorry to keep you waiting. I'll be right there." 5 seconds later, Kawahara Machiko calmed down and pressed the doorbell of the private room. And the time she waited was 4 to 5 times longer than the time it took to arrive after the call ended. The fully exposed camera outside the door seemed to be conducting a cold and silent inspection. During this time, Kawahara Machiko and her subordinates all maintained a slightly forward and respectful posture, standing solemnly in absolute silence. Finally, the door to the private room opened. Kawahara Machiko thought that she would encounter an even harsher gaze of inspection, but she didn't. It looked like no one in the private room was paying special attention to her. The inspection just now was more like a simple and unintentional neglect, a play directed by herself in her mind. The attention of the vast majority of the people here was focused on her target of public relations today, Luo Nan's body. They watched him use his finger as a pen and the water vapor as ink to draw diagrams high in the air. Some people clicked their tongues, some people hissed, and some people simply moaned. "You think the matter isn't big enough?" The one moaning and complaining was the man who had called her over with a frivolous tone. The internal intelligence of the auction house listed him as one of the most terrifying, extraordinary, blood demon. The tone was one thing, but the excitement on his face was the real deal. Kawahara Machiko went to look at the outline of the water vapor imprints, but she came at the wrong time. Luo Nan had just finished his draft. He waved his hand and erased the water vapor diagram. The youngest extraordinary in the world turned her face to face Blood Demon and said, "You said it before. I have to take the initiative. I have to press forward. I have to arrange a position forward. Since they're retreating, I'm going to advance. I'm going to advance until they have nowhere to retreat." Sure enough, his drive was unparalleled. Kawahara Machiko, who had just entered, made an immediate evaluation in her mind. She combined it with the relevant intelligence and secretly pondered how she should respond appropriately when it came time to deepen things. Blood Demon raised an eyebrow. "Even a rabbit will bite when it's cornered. Aren't you worried? I'm saying that headquarters arms are quite long. If you really piss them off, they won't be able to hit you on the ship, but they'll be able to do it over at Osaka City. That will depend on whether or not the true God and the Pope are willing to give up their own training grounds and abdicate their positions to President Abner. I have a premonition that they might not be willing." Blood Demon was very sharp. "What did you discover this time? That cow demon?" Luo Nan's mood was quite relaxed. He pursed his lips in the direction of Kawahara Machiko and casually joked, "Are you preparing to silence her next? Saying that you have tender and protective feelings for the fairer sex isn't wrong in the slightest." Kawahara Machiko could only pretend that she was deaf after being treated as a target of ridicule. Her eyes were focused on her nose was focused on her mouth, and her mouth was focused on her heart. She stood still like a statue, not adding any variables to the conversation between the two big shots. Sure enough, Luo Nan was the first to return to the main topic. I just feel that Lord's secret contract looks like he's going to make a big deal out of it. With him backing me from the back, I'm emboldened. Hey, you need to know that his agenda is at the back. Haven't I seen the materials already? I'll be careful not to stray off topic. Besides, I might even be able to help out. Blood Demon was a bit startled. He looked at Luo Nan, and Luo Nan responded with a smile. For a time, Blood Demon was actually struck speechless by Luo Nan's strong will to forge ahead. Luckily, he soon cackled loudly. Young people learn things quickly. He then turned to Her Majesty Empress Wu. Don't you think that there's no need for you to make this trip? Her Majesty Empress Wu didn't even raise her head. Her fingertips slowly flipped a page. Do you want to make a bet? No, I don't want to raise a flag. Blood Demon tactfully backed down. By this time, Luo Nan had already called over Kawahara Machiko to make the relevant arrangements. Machiko forced herself to remain calm, but she had a rather resolute attitude. It actually saved him quite a bit of effort. That's about it. There shouldn't be any problems, right? Of course there were problems, but Kawahara Machiko wouldn't reveal any awkward emotions in front of Luo Nan. She bowed once more. It was as if everything was an established procedure, a matter of course. Then, please make your preparations, Mr. Luo. We will notify you 5 minutes in advance. Okay. Luo Nan's answer was simple. Kawahara Machiko took a shallow breath. She maintained her bowed posture as she backed out of the door. When the door to the room closed, she turned to face her subordinates outside. Her eyes were completely filled with a sharp, cold and hard light. From now on, it will be time to test everyone's resolve. What sort of resolve? Kawahara Machiko didn't give a clear answer, but at this time, many people naturally came to a realization. It was loyalty. And it wasn't necessarily towards the auction house. It was towards Executive Kawahara himself. This was a bit more subtle. In any case, Executive Kawahara, who had received some sort of order from within the room, seemed to be the one who truly held a resolve to act. Chapter 1081. The auction continued to proceed in a chaotic and subtle state. All sorts of useful and useless items were auctioned off, but most of them had a certain commemorative value. However, regardless of whether it was the auctioneer or the bidders, they were all a bit absent-minded. So much so that the heat couldn't be stirred up. The rate of unauctioned items was clearly higher than normal. Under this sort of atmosphere, it was quite normal for 1 or 2 unauctioned items to be auctioned off. Kenta Toyama is probably beating his chest and stamping his feet. They gave you such a good excuse in vain. They just think so. Bai Xinyan rested her chin on Zhang Yingying's shoulder and laughed softly. Someone has his face raised to the sky. Maybe he only has eyes for the sky. No. He only has eyes for the sea of stars. Don't pretend to be crazy under the influence of alcohol. Zhang Yingying warned her, but Bai Xinyan kissed her on the cheek. The two immediately became a ball. Luo Nan ignored the small chaos in the room. He continued to prepare in an orderly manner. He asked Blood Demon to introduce a few more details about the painting materials he was going to use. In other words, the secret deed and the special stylus. It looked like he really was going to paint. The problem was, he only saw the preparation. He didn't see the painting. There was a knock on the door to the room at this time. Kawahara Machiko personally came over to inform him, "Mr. Luo, it's almost time." "Oh, how do I get there?" "Please follow me." Blood Demon bared his teeth. Rather than saying he was nervous and worried, it would be better to say that he was highly excited. Hey, are you really going to do it here? Don't say I didn't tell you. Impromptu speeches, compositions, and the like might not be taken care of. Many people will be able to use it against you. Luo Nan grunted. If water really doesn't get in, then wouldn't many people be disappointed and in despair? How are we going to talk about the follow-up? Zhang Yingying, who was still being strangled by Xinyan, grew more and more bewildered. Is this for real? Bai Xinyan responded by her ear. It's clearly a fake body. But, his mind is definitely his own. Are you scared? Blood Demon raised his eyebrows. He didn't give up on his earlier thoughts. He made one last effort. Are you really not going to find a few helpers who can help you fill in the gaps? Luo Nan had already turned around and walked outside. I have to get a feel of things first. Don't they all say, know yourself and know your enemy? Also, I have to give everyone a chance to get to know me and understand me. TSK. Blood Demon watched as Luo Nan left the room. He and Her Majesty Empress Wu were deeply moved. You suddenly felt your blood run cold, didn't you? I didn't. That's because your Majesty has a big heart. Her Majesty Empress Wu laughed soundlessly. She explained a bit more, which was rare for her. He just has a sharp gaze, and can see through people's hearts. Then, he does what he can to make people feel uncomfortable. From the looks of it, he's still at the stage where he's just acting on his own whims. Even if he's thinking about it, it's not thorough. It's just that you guys can't understand the boundaries of his thoughts, so you're just scaring yourselves. Io, your Majesty, is that what you think? The Blood Demon immediately came over. Since we're talking about borders, where's our little brother's border? Why don't we compare? The Martial Emperor neither agreed nor disagreed. The Blood Demon rolled his eyes and said with a smile, then I'll go first. My keyword is cloak. As he spat out these words, the Blood Demon smiled, but he stared closely at Her Majesty Empress Wu's expression. The problem was that the latter was still too lazy to even lift his eyelids and said, great minds think alike. Zhang Yingying, who was at the side, could see through the Blood Demon's overly impatient thoughts. She curled her lips but soon called out, it's on stage, it's on stage. Before she spoke, the ring screen in the private room had already begun to display a different image. The auctioneer on the stage had just ended an unsuccessful round of auctions. Not only was his mouth parched, but his face and hair were also covered in a layer of fine sweat. This was all because of the chaos caused by the situation that had gotten out of control. It must be said that he was also one of the few senior figures in the industry, but this was the first time he had encountered a situation where the entire venue and several hundred people were not in the right state. It was also at this moment that an order from above came through the earpiece. It was absurd and unquestionable. The auctioneer's mind was blank. He subconsciously turned his face to look at the side of the stage. Just at this moment, the light on and below the stage changed. The light on the auction stage was dim, but below the stage, there was a new area where the light was focused. There, a youth dressed in ordinary clothes, but his age was unusually young. He didn't make any unnecessary movements and directly walked forward, casting his gaze over to the auction stage. The experienced auctioneer's gaze met the youngster's. For some inexplicable reason, he was a little dazed. The absurd order that entered his ears seemed to have become his own thoughts, and he blurted out in a daze. The next auction item will be displayed by the auction house's special guest. Halfway through his sentence, the auctioneer paused. This was because he clearly saw that after the youngster walked onto the stage, his originally casual and informal attire actually transformed out of thin air into a rather decent formal suit. He even wore a bow tie. The only difference was that his age did not match. Why did this formal suit look exactly the same as him? The auctioneer's face was full of shock, and he was stunned on the stage. For a portion of the bidders below the stage, the series of changes had a rather dramatic effect. There was clearly going to be an exchange between the experienced auctioneer and the youngster who had suddenly appeared and performed magic. After all, not everyone was filled with such thoughts. There were quite a few people on this enormous cruise ship that gathered the most cutting-edge researchers and investors in distortion technology. They were completely ignorant of the undercurrents beneath the auction. And it was precisely this group of people who rather approved of the stage effect before their eyes. They began to applaud and laugh out of sincerity or out of politeness. There was indeed quite a bit of momentum. But not long after, these claps and laughter were extinguished by the indescribably stagnant atmosphere around them. This caused the atmosphere of the auction to become even more bizarre. Luo Nan smoothly replaced the original auctioneer under the attention of all sorts of gazes. He stood behind the auction stage. The stage was a bit high, but it was still acceptable. He stood still and faced the participants of the auction like this, as well as the various cameras. He took a light breath and revealed a smile towards the place where the laughter had first come from. He used a seemingly professional tone to begin his speech. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very sorry. Actually, I really wanted to say that those of you who can still laugh right now, please leave immediately. This is because you don't know anything. This is a good thing. Sometimes knowledge itself is pain. The best way to preserve happiness is to maintain ignorance. These words caused the expressions of many people to change. Luonan continued speaking without a care. Please forgive me if my words have offended you. After all, I'm young, and this is my first time on the stage. I'm not an expert in matters such as auctions. The reason why I'm able to cross over to host is because I have a background. Actually, there are many people seated here who know me, but there are also many people who don't. There is indeed a certain distance between my circle and everyone else's. Therefore, before I introduce the auction item, please allow me to introduce myself. Chapter 1082. My name is Luonan. I'm 17 years old this year. I'm a 10th grade student at Acumen College in Xia City. Luonan was very serious and very solemn as he announced his true identity from behind the auction stage. It was because of this truth that a sense of dislocation was formed. This caused this auction to instantly become the scene of a youth group speech competition. Emotions of astonishment and absurdity interweaved within the brilliantly lit auction house. Even though Luonan had just given them a cold stab, there were still quite a few people present. They hesitated whether or not they should laugh and support him. In reality, the atmosphere of the auction house was indeed slipping towards a speech competition. Luonan stood ramrod straight, allowing the auction stage to cover most of his body from his chest down. The visual effect really couldn't be described as tall and straight. Only his enunciation was clear. There's one reason why I'm standing here. It's because of the current auction item. The large screen behind him displayed the equipment that had been moved out from the 70 format laboratory and the corresponding annotations. It let all the bidders present know that this auction item included the original location of the wilderness laboratory that housed this equipment in addition to the equipment on the stage. This was a temporary layout of the auction house. The original stage was originally planned to be on the lower level, but it was already being pulled up to display the real thing. But due to Luonan's methods, the stage was torn to pieces. It was already impossible to continue with the original plan. It could only be transferred through the lens. It was hard on the staff of the auction house. These professionals specialized in visual effects were able to use light and shadow effects to create a desolate feeling of order amidst the chaos within the lens of this chaotic scene. This gave off a bit of a feeling of a stage play. Luonan seemed to be moved at this time. This is what my grandfather who has gone mad, my father whose life and death is unknown, and my mother who has already passed away. There are also a few seniors that I know and don't know. They single-handedly created this place in the wilderness. It represents their life experiences and achievements. It is also one of the few places that I know of that I can pay homage to. The dislocation of the bidders below the stage became even more clear. Some people were hesitant, wondering whether or not they should accompany Luonan with tears of sympathy to show their cooperation. Of course, there were even more people who were confused by Luonan's inexplicable speech. The whispers within the auction house were getting louder and louder. People needed to clearly understand the true logic behind this absurd scene. But at this time, Luonan laughed first. After saying so much, everyone should be able to tell that I obviously don't want to sell it. But someone beat me to it and sent it to the auction house. They even deliberately came to show off to me. There's nothing I can do. Luonan just smiled like this. His gaze swept across the field. It didn't matter if it was the hall or the private room. As long as he wanted to look, there was nothing that could obstruct him. At this time, he was the focus of everyone's attention. Luonan raised his left hand and gestured with 2 fingers. As for the other reason, isn't there a saying? No of no. In order to prevent this kind of thing from happening again in the future, although I am not a member of this circle, I must come here to face all the buyers and communicate with as many people as possible. I need you to know me, my mood, my thoughts, and my decisions, and to be able to seriously refer to and evaluate them. It's even better if you can get the corresponding respect. He was clearly smiling, but because of these words, the noise in the venue suddenly weakened. Many tycoons and experts who were whispering to each other subconsciously raised their heads and looked at the stage. His words were subtle and filled with hostility. Luonan continued to express his position. I'm still a student right now. I don't have a formal job. I can only rely on my limited lecture time to obtain some labor fees. At the same time, he had a lot of expenses, such as personal experiments, family security, and other miscellaneous expenses. He also owed a lot of debts, and his assets were really limited. He really did not belong to the same world as everyone else, and basically did not follow the same logic. Therefore, I can only use other, unconventional methods that everyone might not be familiar with to achieve my goals. Here, I have to thank the Toyama Auction House for giving me such an opportunity, allowing me to host this event and use this place to communicate with everyone. The trouble caused to the auction house. Mr. Toyama, right? Although you're not here, you should be paying attention to this. Luo Nan took the initiative to accurately find the camera. He borrowed the signal of the live broadcast to communicate with someone tens of thousands of kilometers away. Like this, I'll treat it as the interest you guys paid. I'll also consider forgiving you guys. Whether or not there were people smashing cups in Banqing, thousands of miles away, they didn't know. But at this moment, the venue was already completely silent. Sound. He looks just like a terrorist. Abner, Constance, Star Shaman, and Romanus sat together in a certain luxurious suite some distance away from the venue. These four extraordinaries, who served in the Ability User Society's headquarters, were watching the live broadcast of the auction. Actually, they were looking at Luo Nan's attitude and performance. However, the evaluation was not made by any one of the four. It was made by the old Witch of Death, who grew increasingly talkative as she grew older. Her real-time vibrations on the mental plane were enough to ensure that she could communicate with the other four extraordinaries without hindrance. Star Shaman was freed from the awkwardness of being a sound transmission puppet. His mouth appeared to be exceptionally lively, echoing with his teacher as he reprimanded Luo Nan. Is he trying to push the wall? Is he trying to expose the disputes of the inner world in front of everyone? This doesn't conform to the agreement we signed with the Star Alliance Committee. The people here barely have the authority to do so, Abner responded simply. As a genuine special guest of the auction, Abner did not participate in the event. One reason was that he needed to participate in the process had already been erased due to a minor accident. The other reason was that there was no need to step into Luo Nan's most sensitive domain during this special period of time. He felt that his previous expression was too vague, but he was unwilling to say too much, so he cast his gaze toward Romanus. Romanus immediately explained, "Currently, Mr. Luo Nan's actions really don't conform to the procedures of the inner world. However, 69% of the people here have the authority to know the truth. The remaining people can basically be adjusted to a certain level. There will be a corresponding psychological specialist to handle the situation. It won't cause too much trouble." Romanus paused for a moment before adding, "When inviting others to participate in this sort of fringe event, it is clear that the inviting party and not the invited party that should bear the costs and the corresponding responsibilities. The Toyama Auction House is not thorough enough in this regard." The corner of Star Shaman's lips twitched, but he just laughed it off in the end. In any case, it didn't matter if Abner said it himself or if Romanus explained it on his behalf. The change in attitude that was manifested was not something that could be hidden from others. Everyone present understood the reason. Death Shaman's telepathic thoughts flowed through the void, containing a subtle meaning. This kid doesn't seem like someone who can cooperate. Chapter 1083. Abner didn't respond. He just narrowed his eyes and focused on Luo Nan on the screen. He watched as this young man used a calmness that didn't match his age to communicate with the audience and everyone who was paying attention to the scene. This kind of scene was no longer the same as the first public lecture last year, where he only talked to himself in the professional field. It was also different from the almost one-sided display on the Zeolite Beach 2 days ago. The current Luo Nan seemed to have begun to pay attention to feedback. At the very least, he had begun to deliberately grab the attention of the people, deliberately provoking the emotions of the people. Just like right now. Since I'm in this position, I have to fulfill my duties as an auctioneer. Let's forget about the exaggerated statements on the screen and in the booklet. Frankly speaking, they're miles away from the main point. Luo Nan seemed to have returned to the main topic. He began to introduce the auction item, but he began with a rhetorical question. It seemed that he was very happy to interact with the bidders at the scene. How many people think that they are just a set of equipment and the address of an abandoned laboratory? It no longer has any practical value and can only satisfy the hobby of a few people? No one responded. The bidders at the scene did not respond enthusiastically enough, because a considerable number of them had not figured out the situation. At least, not yet. Should they feign ignorance now? What about sneaking away? Or should he cooperate obediently? The atmosphere at the scene was somewhat awkward, especially in the eyes of the bystanders. The star sorcerer found it a little funny. This person is really full of resentment. However, what's the use of getting angry at these people? Should I answer my own questions? Or do you want to perform stand-up? Luo Nen laughed from behind the auction stage as he spoke. The audience was clearly cold, but Luo Nen looked like he had a card up his sleeve. There are quite a lot of them. There are about 31 or 32 of them. That's about 1/5 of the total. And it overlaps with the initial laughter. This means that everyone here really doesn't know anything about this. You're still a distance away from our circle. At the very least, you haven't come into contact with the most valuable things yet. I still have to work hard on the next step. As for this, in my opinion, it's best not to join in the fun. However, if he still hadn't made up his mind to leave, it might mean that he didn't have the chance to leave. Thus, he decided to just be a witness. Believe me, there is a reason for your existence. Where did he learn to act like a charlatan? The star shaman couldn't help but speak again, but his brows were already furrowed. There's still a round number. What right does he have to say that? Information? Speculation? Speaking skills? Shut up. The frequency of the old woman's mind oscillation increased slightly, and she displayed a different emotion. The room was silent for a time. Luo Nan continued to speak in a manner that was neither too fast nor too slow. I can see it too. I also don't know. There are some differences inside. There are some gentlemen and ladies who don't know about it, and they really don't know about it at all. But there are some gentlemen, yes, I'm talking about the one at table number 4 who is facing me, the one who is hugging girls on both sides. His heart is obviously clear, but his beautiful female companions are all clueless about it. This is a bit too much. This kind of frivolous joke was meant to tickle people's armpits. Most of the people present were experienced people who had been in business for a long time, so there were very few who laughed along with him. This was also because of Luo Nan's direction. The people present were all reputable characters. They were directly called out by name and the surrounding gazes were focused on them. It was hard for them to keep their faces. However, the person who was named was really stunned. It was obvious from his appearance that he was shocked. His anger was greater than his anger, and he had a classic expression on his face, as if his thoughts had been exposed. Don't be embarrassed, mister. Thank you for hearing about me from who knows where. Even though I don't know what your name is, there are quite a few people like you who are too much. Everyone should know this in their hearts. I know this as well. Luo Nan's bright gaze swept across the room once more. It seemed to be undirected, but practically everyone subconsciously lowered their gazes. They averted their gazes to avoid meeting his gaze, which seemed to be able to pierce through all secrets. Abner wasn't present, but he still unconsciously adjusted his sitting posture. He wasn't sure if Luo Nan really possessed the ability to read minds, but no one present had raised any objections up until now. Moreover, they had instinctively developed fear in their hearts. This proved that Luo Nan had already achieved initial control over the situation. He could place the emotions of over 100 billionaires and industry elites in the palm of his hand and knead them. This was becoming more and more different from past intelligence. Luo Nan began to fiddle with the remote control on the auction stage. He adjusted the display angle of the equipment on the large screen. Actually, there's no need for everyone's thoughts to be too complicated. In terms of pure equipment, only a few people have collectible value. But those who believe that it has collectible value are basically clear about the true value hidden behind it. The main thing is the location of its location, the object of its research, and the fact that it can be grasped. Me. Luo Nan's tone sounded careless. His words came from wherever he was thinking. But it was unknown how many people in the auction house were dripping with cold sweat because of his words. Their legs were trembling. Yes, more and more people were coming back to their senses. They had allowed this killing star, known as the humanoid infrasonic array, to come to the scene and stir up such havoc. How could there be anything good in the future? What's up with the Toyama auction house? What's up with Wang Yu? What's up with those people at headquarters? Could it be that the rumors were true? That the situation had spiraled out of control? There were already people looking all around, looking for a way to escape. There were also people who had begun to summon their bodyguards. Of course, contacting the organizers and co-organizers was also a very common choice. There were people who directly called Abner. Yes, it was through Romanus, the Secretary General. Abner had already entered a state of communication silence. He was the highest leader of the society in this critical moment. Whether it was in name or in reality, he needed to leave some leeway for final adjustments. Romanus was very experienced in this aspect. Although the people who were able to call him were all big shots who had gone through many rounds of requests, he was still able to calmly respond no matter what request the other party made. Actually, there weren't any new tricks. It was nothing more than targeting Luo Nan. Requests to stop him, reprimands, pleads, and so on. During this period of time, Romanus spoke the most words. We are actively communicating with Mr. Luo Nan. We have transmitted a clear signal, and we await his reply. This was the honest truth. Of course, everyone understood the second half of the unfinished sentence. Luo Nan had already received their words, but he didn't give a clear response. Romanus repeated the same sentence pattern and meaning many times, but he didn't show the slightest bit of impatience. He also didn't show any resentment towards Luo Nan. This was because he understood very well that if he were to stand in Luo Nan's position, he wouldn't be clear either. He borrowed this thinking space to toss and turn a few things. He wanted to probe the bottom line of headquarters a step further. This was the smartest choice. Abner took the initiative to release a signal of cooperation to Luo Nan through the dual channels of Blood Demon and Her Majesty Empress Wu. He didn't explicitly state the method or the time limit of the feedback. The 2 hours from 8 in the evening to 10 in the evening were tantamount to giving Luo Nan a window to express and vent his emotions. Everyone was calculating their own bottom line. Recalculating. Luo Nan was acting recklessly right now. Of course they were nervous, but they could also observe the intentions of the other party. If Luo Nan had straightforwardly agreed to headquarters' request and maintained a relatively calm and reserved manner, they would have breathed a sigh of relief right now. However, they would absolutely not express their thanks in a formal meeting. On the contrary, they would certainly take a step forward and launch an attack, all the way until they touched Luo Nan's bottom line. Luo Nan's current lack of response was precisely a display of taking the initiative. For the time being, this was correct. Everything was within expectations. But there was one thing that Romanus didn't understand. What was the true meaning behind Luo Nan's venting? Was it purely for considerations of the negotiation situation? This conjecture was admittedly reasonable, but it didn't quite match with Luo Nan's way of thinking, which they grasped. Even if Luo Nan's current behavior in public was more mature than before and had made great progress, there shouldn't be too many deviations in his innermost core. Luo Nan was a stubborn youth who always focused on all sorts of regular structures. He tended to use a set of logical programs to deal with all problems. How could he suddenly become a great charlatan who stirred people's hearts? This wasn't a question of understanding or not. It depended on whether or not his knowledge and ability system could support him. For this reason, Romanus had two conjectures. First, Luo Nan's knowledge structure was more complete and profound than people's previous judgments, deductions, and conjectures. He possessed an even more powerful system to support him. Second, perhaps there was a more direct and purer goal behind the seemingly complex schemes of the human heart? Romanus walked to the balcony outside the suite for the sake of answering the phone. This was one of the areas with the best view on the jade light, but right now he could only see the flickering lights of the ship. The surrounding area was flooded with dark clouds and waves. His eyes weren't good, and his mental senses were warped and disturbed by the increasingly complex changes in the magnetic field. Though it wasn't to the extent of being blind with one's eyes wide open, Luo Nan felt as if he had missed something. It was as if he had missed some extremely important details. Or perhaps, they had never understood the details of the book. Luo Nan's voice was transmitted and restored in the room through the digital signal. There's a very complicated thread of story behind this set of equipment. There are some things that even I don't quite understand. Perhaps there are some people here who know more than I do. Yep, I can't limit myself to the scene. There are some gentlemen and ladies who are paying attention to this place through the live broadcast signal. They are much clearer than I am. But no matter what others think, since I'm standing here, I will do my utmost to display its value. It won't just be a gimmick to display my strength and a tool to pinch others. And I believe that this process will bear corresponding fruits. I will piece together more truths. This isn't something that can be changed by the will of certain people. Romanus turned around just in time to see Luo Nan's smile on the screen. It was exceptionally brilliant. Chapter 1084. What an incredible young man. Machiko Kawahara was standing in the center of the exhibition hall in Area C. In front of her was the arc-shaped booth that was torn apart by an unknown force. But now, the original outline could no longer be seen. People's attention was more easily attracted by the broken cracks themselves. These cracks were so huge that there was no support between the pieces of the booth. It seemed that it was impossible to resist the heavy equipment above and could collapse at any time. However, they stood there steadily. The closer they were, the more details they saw, the more incredible it was. According to the original plan, this place should have been upgraded to the next floor before the auction started and served as the main exhibition area. But at this time, the young man who was talking in the venue directly ruined this plan. However, some pre-installed equipment around it could still work, so this place was temporarily enclosed and used as half of the backstage. At this time, many staff members were walking back and forth here, dealing with various problems, at least on the surface. No matter how busy the staff members were, they carefully bypassed the central booth area. At the same time, there were some researchers with different backgrounds, carrying large and small instruments, carefully walking through the cracks in the steel, trying to find more valuable clues. Two different circles temporarily went hand in hand with each other. Machiko Kawahara was here. Through the ubiquitous screens and projections, she was paying attention to the progress of the auction. She watched the young man who completely distorted the trajectory of her life speak on the stage. He also distorted the thoughts and wills of others. Surprisingly, she didn't have too much resentment. She was more envious, and she thought of her son. If Jie can become like this when he grows up, it should be something to be proud of. She didn't have much feelings for her tool husband, but her stubborn and cute young son was one of the important fulcrum of her life. Just thinking about the future a little, even if it was mostly fantasy elements, could remove some of the barriers in her heart and reduce some of the pressure. This rare moment of freedom did not last for long. Because of the series of changes at the auction site, while the headquarters was under pressure, they also transmitted more intense pressure and even emotions. Bastard! How can you change the process and personnel of the auction at will? Are you going to bet on Toyama's decades of reputation? Machiko Kawahara took a deep breath, adjusted her breathing, and answered with an appropriate calm attitude. Vice President, I am following the instructions of the Board of Directors. I have obtained Mr. Luo Nan's understanding. I haven't occupied any resources outside of my authority. The voice on the other side suddenly rose a notch. So you're using the reputation of the Toyama family as a bargaining chip and recklessly throwing it out? Obviously, Shingo Toyama, the grandson of President Kenta Toyama, was so angry that he blurted out some inappropriate words. However, he wasn't completely stupid. He forcefully turned the situation around. The board of directors only gave you the order to control the unsold, and no other authority. Are you trying to be smart, or are you deliberately avoiding the question? Look at the situation now. That damned brat actually named the president. How much pressure and passivity will this bring to the company? Vice President, forgive me for having a different opinion. Machiko Kawahara still maintained a calm tone. I believe that compared to actively creating an unsold auction in public, passively accepting under power should be more reasonable and easier for people to understand. After all, the other side was an influential figure in the upper-class circle. Moreover, as an executive and as a negotiator, I have the authority to temporarily change the process of the first-level auction. No, you don't. Shingo Toyama was practically roaring. If I were merely a sounding board, then the board of directors wouldn't need to send me thousands of miles away to the Pacific Ocean. Machiko Kawahara's voice had a bit more of a biting cold metallic tone. Forgive me for speaking frankly, but according to your understanding, Vice President, you don't expect or hope for this public relations to achieve results. Is it to avoid a momentary victory that magnifies one's own inferiority under power? There was a crash on the other side, and it was unknown what had fallen. Shingo Toyama's voice was clenched into a ball in his fury. He rolled in his throat. Kawahara, are you sure you know what you're saying? Even if you're the representative of the Kawahara clan. You're throwing your clan's face into the mud when you're saying these wild and absurd words. How shameful, Kawahara. I'm truly sorry. Machiko Kawahara used an insincere tone to respond. I will reflect on myself. Please forgive me for being overly excited after completing this mission. Then she hung up the call. Her lips drew a biting cold arc, and it just so happened that Luo Nan's brilliant smile echoed it. The Kawahara clan? Wasn't she already prepared when she was pushed out without hesitation? Was she prepared to sacrifice herself? There really was a truth hidden in the words she spoke to her subordinates before this. She already didn't have the qualifications to return. At the very least, she didn't have the status as an executive. Before and after she accepted this troublesome task, she had also heard similar rumors, but she could not find any reasonable logic in it. Therefore, she still had a glimmer of hope, and even the miraculous fantasy of a lower class, overturning the upper class. But now she was disappointed. It was as she said. The board of directors wasn't prepared to succeed at all. They really did want to abandon her, and only she was allowed to be abandoned. Under these circumstances, her efforts had turned into rebellion. This wasn't a good sign. Machiko Kawahara was an outstanding woman who often struggled in the business world, especially in a region like Banqing that traditionally lacked strong women. Her will was very firm for her to be able to stand out. She was already prepared to experience a low tide in her heart. She wasn't prepared to go back and suffer the reprimand and humiliation of those old fellows who had decided her fate. She was aware of the consequences of internal strife, but she couldn't accept this misfortune that was like winning the lottery. She would just directly transfer to a flight in D-City. She would go to the new continent or the old continent's inland cities and nurse her body and mind. She would make plans after the rumors died down. Her accumulation over the years, whether in terms of wealth or connections, was enough to support her to live a leisurely life. Of course, Koji, who was staying in Banqing, was also a problem. The identity of the fourth-generation heir of the Kawahara family might not be so secure. If it really didn't work out, she would agree to a family marriage after a period of deadlock. She was still quite valuable in the eyes of the 40 to 80 generations of Banqing's political and business community. Or, she could find a suitable son-in-law and use marriage to try to climb up in a new field. Machiko Kawahara calmly planned the future for herself and began to circle some preliminary candidates. She knew that this was another form of pressure relief. But in any case, it was meaningless to stay on the Jade Light. Machiko Kawahara glanced at the dazzling young man on the auction stage again and directly turned around to leave. At the same time, she contacted her secretary to arrange the follow-up itinerary. Executive Director Kawahara, you can't leave. Suddenly, someone rushed in front of her and blocked her way. Machiko Kawahara was shocked. At this time, the broken booth behind her suddenly made a harsh friction sound, and it was getting louder and louder. It was like the prelude to the collapse of the whole thing. Chapter 1085. The booth shook, startling the backstage staff and researchers, but they did not see any obvious structural changes. In this place, the external structure was not reliable. Some of them were especially excited after the fright, such as Dr. Sun Can. While the booth was shaking, he had a strong premonition. At the same time, the surveillance equipment he had brought over also captured a clearer signal. Forward, forward. No up. In his excitement, Sun Can's instructions weren't clear enough. In the end, he simply took over personally, ignoring the danger and rushing to the front line to direct the adjustment of the equipment parameters. Kawahara Machiko looked at the booth structure and the subsequent noise. It was the same. Anyway, a non-professional like her wouldn't be able to see anything, so she turned back and faced the person who stopped her. Minister Kawamoto, I remember that you are the on-site dispatcher. Aren't you going to take a look? No, General Manager Kawahara. My current mission is to stop you. Kawaguchi Tashimoto was the one who answered the call from the vice president, Shingo Toyama, and questioned Kawahara Machiko's behavior. Kawahara Machiko wasn't angry. Instead, she laughed. Why are you stopping me? Hika-san. You are too nervous. This has nothing to do with me now. I won't do anything else. Hiku-jun was a robust man in his 40s. Apart from his slightly sparse hair, his face and body shape were relatively regular. However, at this moment, his face was flushed, and his eyes were shining. He was nervous and excited. Manager Hayuan, you can't do anything else on the ship, but there's something you must do. You must immediately return to Ban City to report on your work, and not anywhere else. Kawahara Machiko shook her head. This is not something you should consider. That's right. But now, I have been authorized by the board of directors to supervise your execution of this order. Hikujun took a few deep breaths and adjusted his mentality. You don't need to doubt me, Mr. Hara. I'm here to deliver the message for you, or for the dignity of the Hara family. If you refuse, there will be a clearer order, and at that time, I may not call you Mr. Hara anymore. Did you accept someone's order in your dreams? Kawahara Machiko coldly commented. Stupid guy, you don't have the right, and the board of directors doesn't have the right to imprison an executive director. Hikujun, who was judged to be stupid, became calmer and calmer. The company doesn't have it, but the parent company does. If the parent company doesn't have it, there are higher-ups. In comparison, I may be stupid, but what are you? The robust man began to approach Kawahara Machiko, but the latter's icy gaze had already lost the power to stop him. However, when Kawaguchi-jun approached, his voice softened. Jinzi, I don't want to care about what fate awaits you, I also need to work hard for my own fate. However, on account of the fact that I was once your candidate for marriage, I don't want to forcibly deprive you of your authority. You can try to understand it, even if the more you understand, the more despair you will feel. Your situation is much worse than you imagined. Kawahara Machiko was slightly absent-minded, but she quickly stared at Kawaguchi-jun. This man was inferior to her in the workplace, but his outstanding family and school background were enough to support a considerable number of contacts and intelligence channels. What do you know? I don't know anything. But I clearly know that ever since you were chosen to accept this assignment, the value of your routine has only been a bow of apology. And then there's a tool called Kawahara Machiko. It's just that you became a special choice at a special time. Regardless of success or failure, it has become your symbol. Kawaguchi-jun's tone was extremely gentle, just like when he was trying to understand back then. But his eyes were as dirty and greedy as they were back then, and there was even a certain hidden pleasure in them. Zhenzi, you know that many people will be interested in this symbol. They are actually interested in Luo Nan, or perhaps they fear him or revere him. But they have no way to confront him head-on, so they found you. In a certain sense, you possess a certain collectible value because of your so-called hookup with him. Kawahara Machiko faced these extremely offensive and insulting words with indifference. These things sounded absurd and dirty, but in some circles, they didn't count for much. If she was a normal person in the business world, this might not necessarily be the case. But she was a rather famous family representative who still revolved in the traditional and decadent circles of power. The backlash would come even more cruelly. She was a member of that traditional and decadent circle. She used to look at others with cold eyes, but now it was finally her turn. It wasn't strange at all. Kawahara Machiko even curled her lips and sneered a bit. Yes, that's the expression. That's the way you are. The corner of Kawaguchi-jun's eyes twitched, and a flush of red suffused his face. He advanced half a step forward, practically sticking close to Kawahara Machiko's body. He lowered his voice to the point that it was nearly inaudible amidst the trembling noise of the steel structure of the original exhibition stage. I know that you'll definitely understand. You see, we're all thinking the same thing. The scene in the auction, Luo Nan's words. Actually, if we followed the original plan to auction off those cumbersome equipment, it would be exactly the same as your current situation. That young gentleman destroyed this auction, but he increased his value. He's like a powerful source of radiation. He shoots rays at your body, causing you to emit a dangerous yet enchanting light. There are plenty of people in this world who don't dare or can't touch him in person. But they hope to go through you to personally feel the power of that power, to the point of destroying, to the point of trampling. So you're having an orgasm. Kawahara Machiko didn't dodge. Her smile became even deeper and more mocking. The instant the words left her mouth, she suddenly lifted her skirt and lifted her knee, ramming it toward the lower abdomen of the man in front of her. However, Kawaguchi-jun understood her far too well. Even though his heart was in chaos, he was still prepared. He used his hand to block in a dangerous situation. He broke out in a cold sweat, but he still grinned and laughed hoarsely. It's coming. Machiko, I've always been watching you. In the future, I'll also. Ha! Kawaguchi-jun suddenly froze. He was facing the direction of the original exhibition stage. Even though 90% of his attention was placed on Kawahara Machiko, he could still receive some information from the corner of his eye, especially the especially obvious ones. It seemed that the original exhibition stage. Before Kawaguchi-jun could figure out what was going on, a shadow strolled over. The shadow reflected the lights of the exhibition stage, only revealing a gloomy silhouette that was reflected in his eyes. You guys racked your brains to torment this kind of restricted plot. Have you ever considered that there are minors present? The young man faithfully restored his slightly hoarse voice. It was quite recognizable. Let's not talk about whether I like it or not. The problem is that your level of concentration is clearly lacking. Shouldn't I be the center of attention? At this time, Kawahara Machiko struggled free from Kawaguchi-jun's grip with all her might, pulling away from him. She was still gasping for breath, but she was startled by Luo Nan's sudden appearance. Why was Luo Nan, who was speaking confidently and with assurance on the upper floor of the auction house, here? Her reaction speed surpassed Kawaguchi-jun's by quite a bit. She swept a glance behind Luo Nan and saw that the original exhibition stage was still in ruins. She quickly turned to face the other side of the exhibition stage. Then she felt a bit dizzy. What appeared in her field of vision was no longer the screen that shielded the original exhibition stage. Instead, it was the messy arrangement of banquet tables. There were also over 100 people dressed in formal attire. They were bright and beautiful, but right now they were stupefied. It was as if they were in a dream. The auction house? No. Kawahara Machiko turned her head once more, but she saw the original exhibition stage, which was still buzzing and trembling. It was in pieces. Thud. Kawaguchi-jun finally reacted at this time, but he was in a much worse state than Kawahara Machiko. His rising momentum vanished like smoke into thin air. He turned around a few times in a daze, and his legs became knotted as he tripped and fell to the ground. It was only at this time that his heart, which was filled with bewilderment, was shaken out of his throat. Where is this? No one answered him. Perhaps no one could answer him. Kawahara Machiko turned her gaze again and looked at the audience below the stage, at the frightened and stiff bidders. Almost no one was looking at them. In fact, they didn't even pay attention to them from the beginning to the end. Even though there was an extremely explosive and delightful plot here. The reason for this was because there was an even more conspicuous, enormous, and inconceivable object and change appearing before everyone's eyes. Kawahara Machiko was a person who had been neglected in the cracks. She gradually found reason amidst her dizziness, and she let it display extraordinary effects. She jumped out of her experience and logic. She found a barely acceptable explanation for the situation before her eyes. It was the only explanation she had. The original stage on the lower floor overlapped with the auction stage on the upper floor. The original plan that Luo Nan had destroyed and caused the staff to tear up with tears in their eyes had taken a big turn. Now, it was presented in such a form before the eyes of all the participants present. Had the upper floor collapsed, or had the lower floor been lifted up? There was no answer. Kawahara Machiko didn't feel anything else from start to finish, aside from the sound of the vibrating metal structure beside her ears. And the reality before her eyes was this. The two floors that were specially used for display had a total height of nearly 10 meters. They overlapped together in such a gentle manner. There wasn't even any substantial conflict between them. The auction stage in front of Luo Nan had disappeared without a trace. That was why he strolled to the front of the stage. This was the place where the original exhibition stage barely had a foothold. Of course, this was a more suitable location for focus. Here, he smiled as he welcomed the gazes of everyone present and the entire world. He also felt the sudden explosion of the depths of their perception and emotions. Even if no one spoke, Luo Nan knew. And it wasn't just the people present. It wasn't just the pitiful first-line personnel on the jadeite light. It included all the living beings in a wider range who were paying attention to this place in various forms. That's right. Luo Nan's soul cloak had been damaged by sin poison. It was riddled with holes, and it had seriously degenerated. It temporarily didn't possess the ability to monitor the entire world, but he still had other methods of detection. For example, a closed system. The so-called closed system was originally a solution formed by Luo Nan to deal with the lack of range and sensitivity of his mental senses. It used its own laws to distort the me and not me as a standard to capture and analyze the target. During this process, Luo Nan used the method of order construction from the near to the far, from the inside to the outside, to form a telescope-like clairvoyance mode. It captured details that were originally unknown to him outside the range of his mental senses. After the soul cloak took form, this system wasn't very useful. It only existed as a large production line for soul strength. However, the Luo Nan Qi, which pointed directly at the laws of the human heart, was actually born from this system. Now, the detection function of the closed system was online once more. And after a period of tempering, coupled with the infiltration and changes of the mica structure, it was much more sensitive than it was in the beginning. The root of the problem was that a tiger would not fall even if it died. A tree would still have its roots cut off. Traces of the layout of the past were left behind in the world. Luo Nan's soul cloak and the mica structure recombined and reconstructed, rapidly expanding. The living beings that were once covered by the soul cloak, shrouded by the living starry sky, and bound by the altar's spiderweb would more or less respond. They had already been sent into the Luo Nan Qi. They would continue to profit from it, becoming food for the growth of the frame of Luo Nan's body and soul. At the very least, they would become the Cepheid variables that radiated periodic pulsations on the star atlas. They would provide a clear reference. There were also rich and powerful people from all walks of life who had joined the auction through remote signals. It wasn't necessarily that there weren't any of them. It should be said that there were certainly such existences. This was the result of Luo Nan's soul cloak, the altar's spiderweb, and even the daytime nightmare covering the 500 million square kilometers of the Earth's surface region. However, the vast majority of these people did not know Luo Nan before this. Or perhaps they knew him but they had no interest in him. They did not directly touch the switch, and they were unable to form a corresponding relationship. The core function of the Luo Nan Qi had always been dormant. Right now, they were just making up for this lesson. The corresponding relationship had indeed been established. It didn't matter what sort of goal these people had in observing, considering, or scheming. For example, the arrangements made against Kawahara Machiko were filled with filthy and inferior thoughts. They took pleasure in doing so. But their original thoughts really did revolve around the central axis of Luo Nan. They spun and formed slender threads of sugar. They became ingredients that might not be tasty, but they were indeed usable. The reason why Hikujun was so impatient to reveal his true feelings was because of the interference and influence of the Luo Nan Qi. But this wasn't enough. If they had this kind of energy, why did they need to blindly stir things up? Luo Nan believed that the chaotic emotions of these people needed a clearer direction. They needed a more intuitive stimulus. This kind of thing didn't count. And so, Luo Nan clapped his hands. Everyone, focus your attention. The reason I've changed the layout of the booth is to enhance the display effect. I don't have enough experience in controlling the scene. If this little magic trick has troubled everyone, then we need to clear our minds and return to the most valuable level. Chapter 1086. A little magic trick? Do the youngsters nowadays all have this kind of temperament? Death Shaman had lived for a long time and was used to flaunting his seniority. He was too lazy to beat around the bush, so he spoke more and more bluntly. No one in the room responded immediately. Almost 5 seconds passed before Constance, who had been silent all this while, spoke. The spatial distortion layers are almost perfect. Just almost. Star Shaman subconsciously retorted. His eyebrows were furrowed, and his pale face was nearly transparent. A layer of faint, illusory light circulated within it. It looked like he was staring at the projection on the screen, but he was actually releasing his mental senses to observe the situation. The upper layer has been swallowed up, allowing the lower layer to be lifted up. No, it's directly squeezed together. Then there's the open spatial fault. The connection with the local spacetime is very subtle. Conventional experience was practically meaningless when it came to spatial shifts. Star Shaman's ability to say these things proved that his insight and knowledge were top-notch. Plus, he really did find some flaws. Fortunately, the light was bright. Otherwise, the curtain wall behind us would have been warped long ago. Indeed, It was as Star Shaman said. There was a clear distortion in the material and shadow structure behind the overlapping booth. This was the result of the spatial fault of the newly opened and temporarily swallowed upper layer of the booth. It was the result of mutual interference with the squeezed and distorted local spacetime. And the flaw he was referring to was actually nitpicking. The visual effect was even more astonishing. No matter what, a design was just a design. The execution was the most important thing. A partial distortion of local spacetime, combined with the concealment of the spatial fault. It's almost a dazzling display. Who else could do such a thing now? Ouyang Chen? Apollon? And Connie. The people Abner pointed out were all famous spatial masters of the inner world. They all possessed the ability to construct spatial distortions and shifts. Among them was Constance, who was next to him. I need time. Constance was very calm. Also, if it's just a temporary confusion without considering the consequences, Robbie can do it as well. He can even do it better. That clown. Abner furrowed his brows just thinking about it. However, thinking of so many possibilities, he more or less weakened the shock brought by Luo Nan's magic. In addition, he also remembered that the information stated that Luo Nan had gone to the booth to use his methods as soon as he arrived on the jadeite light. There had been 5 to 6 hours in between. Luo Nan should have made preparations in advance. Abner tried to calm himself down, but he noticed that the Star Shaman was staring at him. This display of extraordinary power and the corresponding force of pushing the wall is a little difficult to explain. It's okay. It's just an understatement. Abner described it in a very Eastern way with a smile. The Star Shaman sneered. Combining Abner's and Necromancer's evaluations together, it might be closer to reality. But when it came to Luo Nan himself, he was in the middle of the situation. He really wasn't too clear on what kind of mentality he was in. He just stood in front of the stage, letting himself become the focal point of everyone's gazes. He also evaluated the present situation and the effects he needed to achieve in the future. Luo Nan's earlier greeting wasn't completely effective. There was still some chaos in the auction house. In addition to the auditory noise created by the participants' shock and bewilderment, there was also visual interference. Standing closest to the front was Kawahara Machiko and Kawaguchi Jun, who was sitting on the ground. This was fine, but behind them were the stupefied researchers led by Song Kansas. There were also the backstage staff. It was a bit of a mess. Especially since they were in the cracks of the steel structure. Luo Nan had to be careful not to step on their heads as he walked back and forth on the stage. It was a fly in the ointment. If he had known earlier, he would have sucked them into the spatial fault. Luo Nan was a bit moved by his lack of experience. Then he signaled with his eyes. The target of his gaze was obviously Kawahara Machiko, who was closest to him. Her status was also relatively suitable. Kawahara Machiko was startled for a moment. She looked at Luo Nan again. Though no words were exchanged, she actually understood Luo Nan's intentions. She gave a slight bow and bypassed Kawaguchi Jun, the on-site supervisor. Luo Nan issued an order to the backstage staff, telling these people who seemed to have fallen into a dream to quickly withdraw and bring along those researchers. Where could they retreat to at this time? The people on this side of the stage could see the warped state of the area behind them. In fact, their colleagues on that side weren't brought up at all. Perhaps they were left on the lower level, or perhaps they were swallowed. This wasn't a problem they had to consider. They could only withdraw in the direction of the emergency passageway of the auction house under Kawahara Machiko's command. Song Kan originally wanted to struggle a bit, but he looked at Luo Nan's back and lost his courage in the end. There were 20 to 30 people and some equipment. It would be quite a scene to withdraw. Even if they were to leave through the emergency passageway, they would still have to pass through the area where the participants were. Over 100 billionaires and experts at the scene just stared blankly at the stream of people who had abruptly appeared along with the shattered stage. They passed by them. Suddenly, someone in the front row reached out and grabbed the corner of a staff member's clothes. He really grabbed it. The clamor within the auction house suddenly rose to a new level. After all, there were some people in the auction house who were still stuck within the scope of daily experience. They confused the spectacle before their eyes with the advanced visual technology of the modern world. They were surprised, but they didn't feel the impact of breaking common sense. But in the instant the corner of their clothes was grabbed, the boundary between reality and unreality was completely broken. The buzzing noise suddenly became chaotic and even sharp. Many people needed to adjust and adapt. Luo Nan saw all of this with his eyes, and his train of thought became even clearer. Sure enough, AR and VR technology were all the rage in the modern world. The more one saw the visual impact, the more likely it was that they would overlook key things. His methods were a bit more straightforward when faced with this kind of situation. Luo Nan didn't control the scene for the time being. He allowed the clamor to continue, and he had ample time to make better preparations. For example, he took out the suitcase with the notebook and drawing materials from the spatial vault. He let the notebook return to its original position, the exact same position as shown on the catalog of the auction items. In addition, he also had to admit that as the upper stage was moved away, the original stage was hastily replaced, and the large screen behind it was gone. The holographic projection equipment that was originally designed below was removed, and the chaos of overlapping space was behind it. Not to mention the visual effect, the subsequent presentation would also require some effort. Luo Nan looked at the suitcase. It was stuffed to the brim with black cloth. It was what Blood Demon called the secret deed book, and he had a new idea. He did it as soon as he thought of it. He snapped his fingers, and the secret deed book in the suitcase soared up like a living dragon. They connected and pounced onto the chaotic background curtain wall behind the stage. They twisted and unfolded, blocking it. How many secret deeds were there in total in a small suitcase? It was impossible to cover the area behind the stage no matter what. In fact, Luo Nan only used them to cover a single corner, and they were basically all used up. However, this unique drawing material, known to be handmade by High Lord Secret Deed, naturally had its own mystical aspects. Under the catalysis of Luo Nan's telepathic thoughts, the dark color of the book actually permeated to the two sides of the diagonal. Actually, this was the result of the special structural rules of the secret deed book spreading outwards. The surrounding dark chaos that Luo Nan had mobilized mixed together with the book. They resonated with each other, and in the span of a few breaths, the curtain wall behind the stage was completely dyed black. Luo Nan wiped it with his telepathic thoughts and nodded. This blackboard was fine, but why did it seem more and more like magic? He shook his head and laughed to himself. He didn't say much. He picked up a paintbrush that was congealed from a special powder and simply crushed the tip of the brush, causing it to return to its powdery state. Then he condensed his telepathic thoughts, forming a brush in the void, and began to paint. H4. A type organic powder followed Luo Nan's telepathic thoughts to form the most flexible of brush strokes. It could be traced, it could be hooked, and it could be brushed. In the blink of an eye, a diagram was laid out. There seemed to be fine sparks of electricity flickering within, giving off a bit of a laser engraving effect. Practically no one in the audience understood what Luo Nan was trying to do in the end. But humans were visual creatures in the end. The image was clear, and their imaginations came naturally. The first thing that appeared before their eyes was a world map. It was the Pacific Ocean version. Whether or not it was accurate was another matter. In short, it had the same meaning. It even took into account the curvature of the Earth's surface. It vaguely displayed a rather three-dimensional feeling, and it had the effect of slowly rotating from left to right, and from west to east. Such a drawing method required parts of the diagram to be born and destroyed, to be similar and to be continuous. There was probably no other artist in the world who had such quick hands aside from Luo Nan. Luo Nan didn't use his hands. He used his soul strength to interfere with reality, which was why he had such ability. The outline of the map was formed. Luo Nan was in the north-central region of the Pacific Ocean, slightly to the right of the 180th meridian. He drew a small circle, clearly marking the current location of the participants present. Then he pulled out an extremely direct line from the marked circle. It still followed the curvature of the Earth. It was like a newly planned route, pointing straight to the south-central plateau region of the old continent. Luo Nan drew another circle there, and then the line powder gathered together. The world map that had just formed was erased in an instant. Then it reorganized and divided, forming a new outline. Soon, one could see that this was the rough topography of the area, and it was still in the process of being refined. This gave off a bit of the flavor of a sand painting. Sure enough, Big Hands were capricious. Can't you just use a projection? Death Witch spat. This time no one responded. This was because everyone, including Death Witch, thought of a problem. Luo Nan had a very detailed grasp of that part of the world. Abner glanced at Romanus, and Romanus understood tacitly. He projected out a satellite map and compared it with Luo Nan's drawing on the blackboard. The precision is very high. Constance murmured. The satellite image was nothing more than this. But Luo Nan drew closer layer by layer, layer by layer. Every time the outline of a scale was formed, he would erase it and enlarge it. It was reasonable to say that he had drawn it in accordance with the satellite image. But the choice was appropriate, and the application was ingenious. It wasn't a simple transfer. Instead, it was a true understanding in the heart, and it was a representation of the outside world. This was a human method, not a mechanical reproduction. Just like this, the scale of Luo Nan's version of the map was enlarged all the way to around 1/500. It actually continued to be enlarged. At this scale, the larger community could no longer fit within his field of vision. But during the process of the image's manifestation, even if Luo Nan didn't say a word, everyone was certain that there was a clear focal point under his pen, and it was constantly drawing closer. Luo Nan used an extremely simple yet miraculous drawing technique to create a vivid and lifelike situation. It was as if he had brought the people of the auction house aboard a passenger plane. The plane was rapidly descending, heading straight towards the depths of the desolate and uninhabited wilderness. Rationally, the extraordinaries were convinced that this wasn't a simple problem of drawing technique. It also involved Luo Nan's guidance on the mental plane. The people at the scene weren't the only ones affected. They were affected as well. They all sensed a certain directivity. This was a hypnotic guidance structure. It was very likely that one would fall for it just by looking at it. This was a function that ordinary projections didn't possess, no matter what. Looking at it this way, Luo Nan's insistence on drawing could be explained. Finally, Luo Nan's drawing of the image was fixed at a certain scale. Right now it was practically 1:1. From the perspective of the audience, they were just a bit further away. They were looking at a shore from a distant position. It was like the edge of some lake. That's right. Luo Nan's drawing of the image gave more and more details to support it. The ripples of the water were calm and slightly hazy, the towering mountains in the distance, the dark clouds in the sky, and the wild animals that came here to forage for food and water. There were even some species that possessed clear mutant characteristics. All of them decorated the surroundings. Luo Nan's sketching technique was displayed to the fullest in this moment. Though it was a simple drawing, it was extremely charming. The viewer just needed to have a bit of imagination to have the feeling of being immersed in the scene. Some people thought that they should be at the center of the lake according to this point of view. This was a bit like virtual reality. Luo Nan didn't even need to say anything at this time. The vast majority of people could guess that the location of the laboratory that was bound to the auction equipment was at a certain location in this wasteland. Actually, many people had already gotten wind of this beforehand. But with Luo Nan's drawing, it really seemed like the next step was the opening scene of the laboratory's door. There were already people who began to secretly memorize the various details displayed in the drawing. Some people simply took pictures, preparing to borrow some supercomputer resources to quickly restore and compare. They wanted to seize the initiative and give it a try. There must be a second to everything. One person takes the lead, and the crowd follows blindly. Even though everyone knew very well that Luo Nan didn't have any reason to easily reveal the location of the laboratory to the public in this manner, they couldn't stop someone from setting an example. Soon, all sorts of lights flashed behind Luo Nan, who was engrossed in drawing. The amount of data transmitted in the venue and the surroundings increased dramatically. This level of concentration is what I need. Luo Nan evaluated. Under the control of his telepathic thoughts, the scene on the curtain wall maintained a seemingly ordinary yet extremely extravagant dynamic effect. Though the mountains didn't move and the water didn't move, the wild animals that drank water by the lakeshore displayed rich details of their activities. Especially the considerable number of wild donkeys by the lakeshore. They swarmed endlessly and slowly moved along the lakeshore, gradually revealing new details that were obscured by their figures. Luo Nan turned around at this time. Chapter 1087. The flashing lights shone on Luo Nan's face, reflecting a strange luster. Those who knew the inside story understood that this was the trace of a water vapor fake. Those who didn't know would never think in this direction. Actually, the vast majority of people in the auction house were currently focusing their gazes on the curtain wall behind Luo Nan as they were taking pictures. They had already entered a state of mind. They all wanted to know the ultimate secret and value contained within the ever-changing picture. It wasn't just them. The extraordinaries were the same. They all unconsciously raised their attention. According to Luo Nan's usual logic, he would certainly have to give some explanations here. As long as they could receive more information, they would accept it even if he said that they were just listening to a lecture. They even began to warm up. Death Witch asked a question. The plateau region in the south-central part of the old continent. It seems to coincide with a view from 2 days ago? It's the wheel hypothesis, right? Abner was extremely sensitive to similar information. Death Witch asked, is there any referential significance? I swept a few glances. The researcher seems to be from Xia City's academic circle. Wu Zuanliang and Ding Jiying are both world-class experts in the field of mutated ecology. They didn't directly analyze the structure of space and time. Instead, they provided circumstantial evidence from the field of ecology. They are quite insightful, and the academic world's evaluation of them is quite high. Romanus would never disappoint when it came to the details of information. However, Luonan disappointed them a few seconds later. It's pointless for you to want to know the specific location of the laboratory. Actually, you've already seen the reason. Take this booth for example. It involves a few techniques related to the structure of space and time. I don't need to explain the specifics. Most of you won't understand anyway. The group of extraordinaries looked at each other in dismay. They only heard Luo Nan continue speaking. All you need to know is that the research direction of this laboratory is spacetime. If you must find a specific reference, the deep blue world is more suitable. Luo Nan's pupils flickered with an extraordinary splendor. They were reflected in the eyes of practically everyone present. You should all know about the deep blue world, right? Many people's eyes flashed. Regardless of whether they had a basic understanding of the word laboratory, they all knew the words deep blue world. There was no need to mention the meaning and value it represented. Luo Nan turned his hand and pointed behind him. The founders of the laboratory are also searching for another deep blue world over here. At the very least, I believe that there is an extremely high possibility that there is a new plane similar to the deep blue world. Perhaps it is a complete land of resources and treasures. Perhaps it is a shattered wreckage. But there is certainly such a plane. This is because you can see traces of 2 areas of space and time coming into contact and colliding over there. As he looked at the noisy scene in the auction hall, Star Shaman suddenly let out a chuckle and pursed his lips. He has ulterior motives. Of course, these extraordinaries from headquarters knew the inside story. They were even more aware that the 70 format laboratory itself was admittedly a research topic related to spacetime. However, it was still quite a distance away from a major discovery like the deep blue world. Of course, if Luo Nan himself knew the information, then it would be a completely different matter. The problem was that Luo Nan had omitted a very crucial element. He only used the simplest of analogies to crudely provoke the emotions and greedy thoughts of the bidders. The facts were very clear, but the motive was very subtle. Was Luo Nan doing what the enemy wanted to do ahead of time, leaving the enemy with nothing to do? Regardless of what the bystanders thought, Luo Nan was currently smiling on the stage. It looks like everyone is quite familiar with the deep blue world. I'll take the liberty to ask, but how many of you in the auction hall and from all over the world have invested in the deep blue world? It seems like a lot of people have. How much is the annual profit? The attendees below the stage really didn't know how to respond to Luo Nan's awkward chatter. In addition, Luo Nan gave them a serious feeling of unease. The pressure continued to rise. Some people's minds began to calm down from the temptation of the new plane. They felt that ensuring their own personal safety was the most reasonable choice. At the same time, the changes in the venue would inevitably attract the attention of the outside world. Security personnel continued to enter, and the order of the venue grew more and more chaotic. From this point of view, Luo Nan really wasn't a good controller of the venue. Luo Nan didn't seem to care. He didn't receive a response, so he simply called out names. He extended a finger and pointed at an old acquaintance. Mr. Hugging Women on both sides. How much profit can you get from that side every year? Everyone's gazes focused in that direction for a time. Unfortunately, that Mr. Hugging women on both sides was taking advantage of the chaotic scene to abandon his two female companions. He was preparing to leave without a sound, but he was instantly nailed to the spot. In the end, that person was experienced in the ways of the world. He just closed his eyes and forced a smile onto his face. Need to pee? No. Actually, Boss Luo, the financial reports from Deep Blue always say the same thing. They're about to enter the period of investment returns. Finally, someone laughed along with him. The laughter spread over a small area, and the atmosphere in the auction hall became much livelier for a time. Luonan laughed as well. Looks like it's going to be very hard. But this makes me even more curious. Why is it that everyone in the Deep Blue world is able to develop it in an orderly manner, regardless of whether there are any profits or not? But when it comes to my side, there's no sign of anything yet, and there are already people stirring up trouble everywhere. The air in the auction hall suddenly turned cold. Luonan was no longer smiling. Everyone, if the coordinates of the Deep Blue world were placed before your eyes right now, the resources and profits there, would you have the guts to do this? Would you be this proactive? Would you do this without Li Wei's permission? Oh, there are many among you who don't know him. There are also many who have come to support us. Forgive me for opening fire, but who told us to be in a capitalistic society? Everyone, how many of you don't have shares in Quantum Corporation, LCRF, Deep Blue, and the Apocalypse Project? These things have really given me quite a bit of trouble recently. Speaking of which, this is the driving force formed by the aggregation and circulation of capital under everyone's name. Sophistry. However, this appearance is the type that I admire. Blood Demon cackled loudly in the room. He applauded and applauded. That's right, these guys. What's the point of beating around the bush? Just directly slap them. The results will be the best. Zhang Yingying, who normally loved this sort of lively scene, found it a bit difficult to laugh. She shot a glance at Blood Demon and ridiculed him to herself. You're probably happy because he's pushing down the wall in a refreshing manner. It's true that Luonan's appearance is very refreshing, but how are we going to deal with the negative effects that follow? Don't look at the multi-millionaires in the venue. They were bewildered and uneasy in front of Luonan. It was unknown how many people would feel resentment as long as Luonan made it through tonight. Not to mention the people who were watching the live broadcast from all over the world. In a certain sense, those who didn't come to participate were the true big shots. Perhaps the retaliation from that side would arrive before the auction was over. Zhang Yingying felt uneasy in her heart. She looked at Her Majesty Empress Wu. Her Majesty Empress Wu was no longer reading the Buddhist scriptures, nor was she looking at the situation of the venue on the large screen. She was a bit lost in her thoughts. Her gaze was directed at the cabin wall to the side. It was as if she wanted to see through these obstacles and see something. These were just Zhang Yingying's guesses. Then, Luonan's words and actions made her cry out in surprise. Frankly speaking, I really admire the driving force of capital. The simple word benefit is able to move a fellow far more powerful and troublesome than everyone here. Luonan didn't turn his head. He just pointed his thumb backward and pointed at the curtain wall. Figures formed where Luonan pointed. The first figure was a person Zhang Yingying was very familiar with, the Horned Demon. Zhang Yingying knew of Luonan's writing skills, but she didn't know why Luonan had drawn the image of the Horned Demon in such detail. It was as if the Horned Demon had been behind the pack of wild donkeys just a moment ago, and only now had his head popped out. Even though it was a simple sketch, one could see that the Horned Demon's clothes were tattered and barely covered his body. He was like a beggar squatting by the lakeside in a daze. She didn't have the chance to organize her thoughts before she heard Luonan say, "This is the fellow who makes decisions for me. Without him, there's a high probability that I wouldn't have intersected with everyone here. Yes, I'll say it again. He doesn't have my authorization. At least, he didn't in the past." Before anyone could figure out what Luonan meant, two more figures appeared one after the other. They were at the very edge of the curtain wall, one on each side. They felt a bit alienated from the main body of the painting, as if they were a bit disjointed. But it was unknown how many people's expressions changed when they saw their appearances clearly. This was especially true for the ability users of the inner world, including the extraordinaries. Of course they knew who they were. Gong Qi and Jin Tong. The reason why they paled in fright was because of the timing of the appearance of the figures. But more importantly, the situation that was presented was extremely treacherous. It was different from the settings of the horned demons, which were close to the plateau environment. It was completely different from the appearance that everyone was used to. The impression of the people of the inner world was that Gong Qi was normally shrewd, ruthless, and gloomy. He rarely showed his emotions. But what was presented in the painting was his hair and beard standing on end. He had a malevolent expression as he flew forward to attack. As for Jin Tong, he still had a golden band around his forehead. He had a light and fierce appearance. However, he punched forward with a dense killing intent. His mouth cracked open in laughter. It was as if he had killed a powerful enemy. It was as if he had gone insane. This was absolutely not an ordinary scene, nor was it a deliberate ugliness. Anyone with a clear understanding of the situation could tell at a glance that this was the appearance of someone who had reached the pinnacle and was on the verge of decline. If one were to combine reality and consider things a bit more meticulously, it could be said that this was the final moment before death. Yet it was vivid and lifelike. His mind was connected. It was as if he would pounce out from the curtain wall in the next moment and die once more in front of them. Outside the venue, there was silence in a room filled with extraordinaires. The air they exhaled seemed to be wrapped in a cold air. No one expressed their opinion. Even the transcendent death shaman remained silent. At some point in time, everyone's gazes were focused on Abner's face. The latter covered the lower half of his face with one hand, revealing only his tightly furrowed brows. He looked like he was in deep thought. His sustainable and calm breathing, his gradually relaxing shoulder and neck muscles. All these details were enough to explain many things. With Abner's abilities, it was naturally not a problem for him to conceal it. However, his status and habits over the years made it meaningless to control such details. The star shaman and Constance looked at each other. They did not respond. In the end, it was the death shaman who sneered faintly on the mental level. In the auction hall, the people's reactions were a little slow. Among the participants, there were those who could recognize all three metahumans. There were also those who knew one or two of them. There were also those who did not know them at all. However, humans were high-level animals that could communicate. They could always fill in some of the truth through the flow of information. The noisy sound waves of the venue, as well as the dense interweaving of electromagnetic signals, were the carrier and representation of information transmission. In comparison, Kawahara Michiko, who stood to the side of the stage, had become an isolated island of information due to her awkward situation. There was no hope for communication, but this kind of loneliness could stimulate her thoughts. She was a bit absent-minded. She wanted to seize the opportunity to leave, but she felt that she might miss an opportunity to save herself. In the end, she looked at Luo Nan. She looked at this young expert who had warped her fate. She suddenly had a feeling. Although Luo Nan was facing the venue right now, there was no one in his eyes. Even if he were to engage in interaction, he was only following a script that had already been designed. He was walking step by step. This was not arrogance, nor was it rigidity. It was just that the situation had developed to this point. The conditions were ripe for success. There was no longer any leeway or possibility for change. Luo Nan made a large movement at this time. He was still facing the venue. His arms were extended and his thumbs were flipped backward. He tapped twice on the two deranged portraits on the two sides of the curtain wall. He appeared frivolous and casual, but it matched his age. Actually, the listing of these two names is a bit offensive. It's unrelated to the main topic. But a friend keeps urging me to not always present Buddha with borrowed flowers. He says that I should take the initiative to take out some decent auction items and join in the fun. So I'll deal with it for the time being. Of course, I know that most people are too lazy to bid right now. It's fine. We'll talk about this later. Luo Nan returned to the main topic, regardless of whether or not others understood the deeper meaning of his words. I just talked about the location of the laboratory and the object of research. Honestly speaking, I don't know much about what will happen next. If anyone knows and can provide me with the corresponding information, I will be very grateful. As for the person I specifically pointed out, yes. It's this fellow called Horned Demon. It's because he dug out the laboratory that had been sealed for over a decade. He tossed and turned it into a mess. Yeah, so I tossed him into a mess. This isn't the main point. The main point is that we can try to get a relatively true understanding of the laboratory through him. Truth be told, this is the first time I've tried this move. Even though I've prepared for several hours in advance, it's still hard to tell the success rate. It's normal to have a bit of risk. Everyone wants to leave. But it's a bit too late. Luo Nan's voice fell. He didn't care about the changes in the expressions of the bidders in the auction house. The creaking, trembling, and scraping sounds of the booth beneath Luo Nan's feet clearly intensified. At the same time, the curtain wall also undulated and swayed. The lines of powder that formed the picture seemed to be shaking off. In the image of the curtain wall, Gong Qi and Jin Tong were fine on the two sides, but the horned demon in the middle was greatly distorted. The highland lakeside environment that existed in the background was similarly distorted. But while it was distorted, it was gradually dyed with other colors, as if by magic. The color of the curtain grew lighter, and the lines of the picture gradually grew deeper. It was natural and clear. It was as if the whistling of the wind and the gurgling of water could be heard. It wasn't as if there really was wind. It brushed past the direction of the curtain wall. There really was water. It flowed out from the cracks in the booth. The auction house was in chaos. Order nearly collapsed from the moment Luo Nan said, "It's too late." Let's not talk about how these rich and powerful people, experts, and security personnel tossed and turned. There was no doubt about it. The cool wind that carried the smell of grass in the wasteland and the running water that suddenly reached their ankles had already made contact with each and every one of them. Cries of alarm rang out without end. Some people even yelled at Luo Nan, telling him not to go too far with his jokes. In fact, there were still people in the auction house who felt that this was very likely a kind of load-free virtual environment, brought about by some sort of brilliant technology. But no matter what they thought, this experience, which was formed from real or fake sensations, was this. It was as if people were sitting in a large boat that was already leaking water. They were sailing toward the lake shore that was depicted, displayed, and warped by the curtain wall. Right in front of them was the horned demon. He stared blankly at the boat as it sailed over. He suddenly laughed inexplicably. The corner of his mouth split open all the way to the back, all the way to the area behind his ears that couldn't be seen. Just like that, his cheeks were torn apart, his head was torn apart, and at the same time, his entire body was torn into pieces. The screams grew louder, but the scene before their eyes didn't change according to the people's will. The horned demon's body was torn apart. But fine sparks of electricity leaped between every torn piece of flesh, bone, and internal organs. Yes, it was just like how Luo Nan's pen moved. The sparks of electricity weaved and crisscrossed densely within the empty areas of the shattered limbs. It formed a faint, door curtain shape. In this way, a bewitching door was formed on the shore with flesh and bones as a support. The magneto-electric sparks formed a curtain. People moved toward this door. They could practically smell the stench of flesh and blood being torn apart. They got closer and closer to the densely woven sparks of electricity. Later on, the sparks of electricity leaped about to penetrate into their hearts and lungs. They pulled out the same components and fused them inside. Then, would their bodies be the same? Would they soon become the same as the horned demon? Fear quickly spread through the hearts of the 100 or so people present. The fear tightened, making it impossible for them to breathe. Their limbs went numb. As for whether it was the effects of suffocation or the consequences of being cut by the sparks of electricity, who knew? There were already security personnel who instinctively pulled out their guns, but they didn't have the courage to raise their guns and take aim. They were even absent-minded. Whether it was the rich, the experts, or the security personnel, their identities and values were all blurred at this moment. They were just helpless passengers on a broken ship that was about to sink. The ship was clearly about to reach the shore, but what they faced was an even more unknown and inexplicable terror. As the body of the ship moved forward, the door curtain of interweaving sparks of electricity and fire on the bewitching door gradually split open from the center. It was hard to see the original shape of the horned demon as it opened and closed. Instead, a pitch-black background that was completely different from the scene at the lakeside of the wasteland was gradually revealed within the hollow of the skeleton. Luo Nan snapped his fingers and the curtain wall that had no sense of existence shook violently once more. This time, the powder on the surface really did rustle and fall. A large area of the central region was shattered into pieces. Then it turned into a large amount of dust particles and transformed into a whistling sandstorm within the pitch-black background. Chapter 1088. The sandstorm assaulted their faces. Right now, no one felt that this was a simple painting, and this was indeed not the case. A sandstorm was a more accurate description of an objective image, but the results of people perceiving the outside world were more or less different. Especially when the swirling grains of sand passed through the magnetic gate of flesh and bones to make direct contact with the outside world. Everything before everyone's eyes became pitted and incomplete. The wasteland lakeside, which had just been dyed in color and was approaching reality, suddenly became riddled with holes. Moreover, it had nothing to do with the impression that people were used to. These holes were the remnants left behind by the piercing and annihilation of the void. This scene was really hard to describe, and it exceeded the scope of most people's experience. In comparison, the wild donkeys that stopped by the lakeside had a more straightforward end. The change in the void covered the front of the lakeside, and this group of unlucky fellows was in this region. Countless bloody holes were gouged into the bodies of several dozen vigorous wild donkeys in a practically unconscious state. They didn't even manage to let out a few blood-curdling screams. There were even some who continued to move forward in a daze. They approached the lakeside and lowered their heads to drink water. And it was during this process that their flesh and blood split under the effects of the deep distortion. Their bodies collapsed, and they smashed into the water, creating a spray of blood and filthy water. This scene happened in front of the 100 or so rich people, experts, and security personnel that were forced to board the ship. They were really close now. The splattered flesh and blood mixed with the strong wind and salty water to form a wave of turbid dark mist. It assaulted the faces of the people in the front row. It was impossible to raise the screams any higher. Instead, some people fainted straight away, bringing with them tables, chairs, and cutlery. They smashed into the muddy waters of the lake. Yes, the broken ship had basically reached the shore. The exterior of the giant ship exhibition hall had completely turned into nothingness. The natural color of the sky had replaced the glorious lights of the venue. The distance between the central southern plateau of the old continent and the location of the Jade Light exceeded 12,000 kilometers. There was a time difference of 6 to 7 hours. It was only 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon here. Even though the sky was covered with dark clouds, it was still daytime. Luo Nan's figure appeared somewhat illusory and transparent under the light of the sky. At this moment, he was in the void region filled with craters and distortions. He was also beside the blood-stained lake shore. In fact, the most accurate location was the entrance to the dark world where the sandstorm was rolling. He was in front of the demonic door that was made of flesh and bones and constructed of magnetism, electricity, and fire. The door was still expanding, and light gradually entered. Or perhaps the original radiance seeped out from within, building a new curtain wall for Luo Nan. Moreover, it gradually deepened, possessing a clearer sense of space. It was precisely because of these lights that they formed a spatial cross-section in their field of vision, allowing people to see that the equipment on the original booth had already been moved in, and it seemed to have been properly arranged. This was indeed the most suitable area to place the equipment, and it was a more suitable scene than the auction booth. It was just that the situation was so urgent that most people wouldn't care about these details at all. All they knew was that although the broken ship had reached the shore, it was still moving forward and was no longer riding the current. In fact, it had never been, not at all. Only God knew how they got here and how they would continue. They didn't even know if they had crashed into it, or if the other side was pressing over. All they knew was that if this continued, this group of people would crash into the terrifying sandstorm behind the gate of magnetism and light. They would end up like a herd of wild donkeys strewn with corpses, or they would become rotten flesh mixed with the ripples of water and mud. "Stop the car! Stop the car!" Someone screamed. "Apologies. There's a bit of an unexpected situation." Luo Nan, the driver, finally revealed his considerate side. He revealed a smile. The degree of sealing here was barely acceptable in the past, but it's like this now. It's mostly due to the effects of the aftermath of the recent battle. But then again, isn't it more intuitive now? In the eyes of the participants who had already logged in, Luo Nan's incorporeal shadow had an expression that became even more blurry. It was as if he was a remote projection of an outsider. Let's not talk about whether it was intuitive or not. This situation was far too F***ing ironic. Clearly, Luonan didn't care about their thoughts. He stood in the center of the brand new live booth, and was instead in the mood to talk. You can think of the situation behind the door as the collision of two spacetime. The laboratory is located at a certain point of the collision of spacetime. The specific direction of research is naturally what kind of spacetime structure is on the other side, as well as the problem of the spacetime structure itself. What was ejected just now was a spacetime fragment caused by a collision or some other reason. It's fine as long as everyone has an impression of it. This is a very important place. I'm just asking everyone to take a look. If I were to really send you in, it would likely cause an even greater disturbance in spacetime. I really can't bear to do it. Luonan's words made a few people relax. And at this time, the demonic gate behind Luonan had clearly expanded to its limits. It began to slowly retract, and the extent was quite large. This sort of change ignited the flames of hope from the bottom of everyone's hearts. Some of the more courageous people tried to communicate, shouting loudly, "Mr. Luo! Boss Luo! We already know our wrongs. Luonan laughed again before this sort of sound wave could form into a large scale. His gaze wasn't cast in this direction. He didn't point at anyone. Instead, there was a subtle feeling of dislocation. He seemed to say something, but his voice was weak. Not a single person present was able to hear him clearly. Some people became furious, not at Luonan, but at their utterly chaotic companions. Boss Luo is going to speak. All of you shut your mouths. This was an extremely low attitude, but it was really useful in this sort of situation. A large portion of people really did shut their mouths, and then it spurred on the others. Everyone within the venue. Oh, right now they were at the edge of the saltwater lake on the plateau that was covered in blood. The group of people were as quiet as chickens. But when everyone cast their gazes forward, cast their gazes towards the location of Luonan's phantom, they first saw the demonic gate close. Then the phantom that bore all of their loathing, fear, and hope disappeared without a trace under the light of the sky. The silence continued for a few seconds. Everyone stared at Luonan, hoping that it was just a temporary fluctuation. But there was no change that met their expectations. There was nothing from start to finish. Screams and curses gushed out. There were a few of them, but they were soon forcefully suppressed by the surrounding people. On one hand, the strong winds of the wilderness brought along the faint roars of wild beasts. On the other hand, and more importantly, there was no longer Luonan's shadow in front of them. The scene of the wilderness was nearly completely restored, but there was still some sort of unnatural scene. The chaotic magneto-electric flames were still drifting disorderly among the remains of the horned demon. It seemed to be extinguished at any time, but it still existed. Even though the flickering and extinguishing electric flames were weak, they still pulled along some sort of throbbing power. It was like a noose that pierced through the depths of everyone's inner organs and even their souls. The tighter it tightened, the lakeside was restored to silence once more. Instead, the sounds of the wind and the roars grew louder and louder. Then finally, someone, perhaps a coward, perhaps an innocent person, began to cry. Truth be told, I'm a bit embarrassed by this scene. Luonan stood on the stage, still speaking in a tiresome tone. His sound waves stirred up echoes within the spacious and empty hall. My ability is really limited. I want to bring more people over, but I can't do it. It's quite hard to go back and forth. Let's leave it at that. Just like this, Luonan faced the empty venue. He extended his hand and made a grasping motion. Indeed, he didn't lift anything. The curtain wall behind him still faithfully reflected the scenery of the lakeside on the plateau. But following the conclusion of, let's leave it at that, the scene gradually faded away in color. It returned to the style of a sand painting sketch with powder lines. Then, it was as if it was wiped away by an invisible rag until it returned to nothingness. Following the erasing of the final traces, the real-time projection of 12,000 kilometers away was thus interrupted. Since this was the result of Luonan's control of his consciousness, it was as if his mind had completely forgotten about it. At this time, or perhaps a bit earlier, the consciousnesses of all the extraordinaries on the jadeite light pierced into the venue at practically the same time. The consciousnesses wandered within the spacious hall, but they were unable to capture any additional traces of existence. Practically everyone wanted to communicate with Luo Nan. But in the end, they had nothing to say under such special circumstances. Abner was one of the first extraordinaries to give up on the idea of communicating ahead of time. This was also because his phone was exploding with calls. The real-time signal of the auction venue transmitted scenes that defied common sense to the eyes of every relevant person in the world through many secret channels. The situation had already exploded. Abner maintained his silence. Romanus was in charge of answering the calls. This lasted for less than half a minute before the true high-level archons of the real world blew up. Abner's status was no lower than anyone else's, but this didn't mean that he could refuse to communicate while he was at the scene. It wasn't just Abner. Even Constance, Star Shaman, Black Lion, Wang Yong, and the others who were nearby wouldn't be able to escape. But even if Abner picked up the phone, what meaning would there be? What could he explain? What could he promise? What could he express? All he could do was act as a cushion in this rarely seen clamor of emotions from the high level of the entire world. Abner had sunk in, giving Romanus a bit of an opening. But this wasn't a chance for him to catch his breath. There were many more things he needed to do right now. He grabbed Star Shaman, who had just dealt with a round of calls. "You contact Qiu Wanshan. I'll contact Dongsheng." "No, Connie. It's better if you do it." "There's also Yen City. I'll contact the Star Alliance Committee and request for the mobilization of the Air Force's rescue spacecraft." Because the living conditions in the highlands were too cruel, it wasn't suitable to build a super-large city. Therefore, the area around that area was an uninhabited area of dozens of square kilometers. Romanus could only expand the area further. Qiu Wanshan and Dongsheng were extraordinaires who guarded Anqing and Spring City, and their influence could radiate to the highlands. Although there were no extraordinaires in Yen City, it was closer, and there might be a nearby reinforcement team. Coupled with the rescue spacecraft from the Star Alliance Committee, this was all the rescue force that could be mobilized in a short period of time. In any case, it was impossible to let a group of billionaires with a net worth of hundreds of billions or even trillions be wiped out in the wilderness in such a way. Any rational archon on Earth wouldn't allow it. "Old Qiu, you're good at ordering people around. But are you sure that person won't cause any more trouble?" Star Shaman, who had completed his assigned task, spat a timely manner. He used his chin to tap the screen. "Mr. Who reverses time and space, is he done yet?" It was just as Star Shaman said. The auction had already lost all meaning. Luo Nan spent a minute or two on the shattered and empty original booth. The curtain wall behind him had been wiped clean, and a new drawing actually appeared. No, it couldn't be considered new. It was a small reincarnation. Luo Nan's earliest drawing of the Pacific Ocean world map appeared once more. There were two markings representing the jadeite light and the highlands lakeside on it. There was also a connecting line between the 2 points that represented a length of 12,000 kilometers. Luo Nan coughed lightly. He faced the empty venue, and of course, there were still those diligent and conscientious working cameras. Thanks to modern technology, he didn't need any live cameras. He could just make do with a rock arm. He clearly wanted to say something, but who was he talking to? In a few breaths of time, new markings were added to the world map. There were many more this time. Anyone who had a slight understanding of modern world geography would immediately know that the vast majority of the markings were distributed in various major cities. Some had only one, some had 2 or 3, some had 4 or 5. The ones with more markings were squeezed together due to the small scale. If one were to think about the meaning behind it, it would be enough to make many people change their expressions in shock. Abner cut off the connection to an archon. His gaze swept across the markings. He ignored the markings that were gathered in various major cities. In the end, his gaze locked onto the ocean region far away from the cities and even the continents. "Is Mao Zhengye in T-City?" "He seems to have returned to his little island." "Ask him if he's there," Romanus responded. But before he could move, Abner shook his head at him. At the same time, Abner connected to the communication. "Director Mao, your vacation is too long. The location is too monotonous. The death which sneered in the nothingness. What's the use of trying to show off at a time like this?" Abner's expression didn't change. He simply communicated with Mao Zhengye before hanging up. He confirmed the authenticity of Romanus' information. He went back at noon today. He's been watching the live broadcast. The room entered a deathly silence once more. Speaking of which, Luo Nan's water vapor body was becoming more and more blurry and transparent under the high light. It made people understand that the method of distorting the distance between space and time must have consumed a considerable amount of energy. But so what? It was impossible to surpass the North Sea with Mount Tai. There was a fundamental difference. He faced the camera and used a casual attitude to organize his words. He said, "Thank you to everyone who is still paying attention. Everyone is quite scattered. But thanks to modern technology, I can communicate with you without any hindrance. There's no need to say too much under the current circumstances. But I've thought before, you guys are experts in making money from doing business. I'm more proficient in reversing space and time. The problem is that the two fields are too far apart. It's hard to avoid the fatigue of talking like chickens and ducks. So, some words need to be said in order to avoid misjudgments and to avoid playing dumb. Of course, it would be even better if I could find a resonance point. I think I've already found one. Everyone in the world pursues life and avoids death. I'm the same. What's different is that it's not as convenient for me to do things when everyone else does things. That's all." Luo Nan bowed towards the camera. He truly completed a middle school-style speech. Another second passed and the world map on the curtain wall was erased. Luo Nan's water vapor body was erased as well. There really was not a single person left in the venue. The live broadcast equipment was still working cautiously. But all it faced and transmitted was emptiness. The emptiness was rapidly expanding and spreading. It was a malevolent power that was unavoidable. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.